Welcome to the channel. If you're a fan of horror stories, you've come to the right place. On this channel, you'll find stories that are true, some are fictional, but as long as they send a chill down your spine and make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, if you like that sort of thing. A fair warning though, some stories contain graphic, violent or sexual content, so viewer discretion is advised. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Uncle Jack's Red Room by Redditor Valpachora. It was a regular Monday when I got the text from Uncle Jack asking me to call him. Jack owns a bar in Geneva, so I figured one of his workers had called off last minute. Because we are a tight family and I live the closest, I assumed I was going to be asked to fill in. Normally this wouldn't bother me, but I already had plans lined up for the week. In my college days, I would have jumped to call him back. Working nights at the bar was good money, and even better opportunity to meet girls. I was now in a committed relationship and sometimes happy. I also didn't need the extra money. I opened the text to clear the notification and left it at that. If asked about it later, I would say I didn't see it, but I really just hoped he would forget. I work remotely as a copywriter. Because of this, I have the freedom to break my weeks up so the heavy work is done Monday through Wednesday. Thursday is just proofreading and submitting my work. This leaves me a long weekend to drink and hang out with my girlfriend, Alice. It is a great routine that I have going. I got into this career because I don't like heavy obligations and lack of control. With most of the work I had planned for today done, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and settled in front of the TV. I lived in a small but comfortable apartment, a typical bedroom, kitchen, living room set up on the 3rd floor. I checked the time on my phone and saw it was 4:45. Alice would be getting done with her shift at the hospital soon. Alice works as a nurse. The typical routine is for her to leave the hospital, run to her place, shower, change, and then head over here. I say typical because her shifts run late fairly often. That she hadn't texted meant there was no change to the schedule. As I was checking the time, I noticed a missed call from my mom. Not thinking much about it, I clicked her name on the screen and put the phone up to my ear. "Hey Elliot, how was your day?" she asked. "It's going well. I got my work done and am relaxing until Alice gets here. How are you doing?" "Things are going well over here. I had a long chat with your sister. Her and Gil have a camping trip planned this weekend." Gil is my sister's long-term boyfriend, who, to the family's annoyance, hasn't proposed yet. "Hey, by the way, Jack called me earlier today when I was at work. I missed his call, but he left a message wanting me to tell you to call him. He actually texted me earlier. I assumed it was to pick up a shift at the bar. It's wild that he would call you and not me," I said. "It's because you never answer your phone. You are 26 years old and you still need your mother as a middleman. Call him back, will you? I don't need him blowing up my phone trying to contact you." Okay. I will call him now before Alice gets here. Talk to you later, alright? Tell Alice I say hi, would you? Talk later. We hung up the phone and I begrudgingly opened up my contact list. I really wasn't looking forward to hearing all about how he needs me to fill in. I clicked Uncle Jack's number and put the phone to my ear. "Hey, Elliot," he answered. "Hi, Uncle Jack. Sorry I wasn't able to call you earlier. I just saw your text." I lied. "That's no problem. I'm assuming you thought I was calling about something related to the Drink Hive. Drink Hive is the name of my uncle's bar. But I was actually wondering if you would be able to house sit my dog, Alfie, Friday through Monday. Aunt Mary and I are leaving for Fort Lauderdale tomorrow. Up to Thursday we have a neighbor boy looking over him, but he goes to his father's house on weekends. Since you work remotely, I thought I would ask." I had spent quite a bit of time at Mary and Jack's house growing up. I think that just comes along with having a family that lives close by. I never knew how much money Drink Hive pulled in, but apparently it was enough. Uncle Jack had a remote 4-bedroom house with everything you could want. Hot tub, pool, and foosball tables, and a 5-seater bar loaded with hard liquor. Since the house was so remote, you could throw a party there and no neighbors would complain. I thought about it for a second before answering. I actually have plans with Alice to go up to her parents' house this Saturday. This is a complete lie. Alice's parents live in town. I just wanted to make it sound far away, so Jack would give me some incentive to do this. "I guess I could call it off, but I really don't get to see them as much as she likes," I said. "How about this? I'll load the fridge and pantry and buy you beer. You won't need to buy dinner. Plus you and Alice can enjoy the hot tub. I normally wouldn't ask you to spend the night, but we have terrible weather this weekend, and Alfie hates thunder." I heard his offer, but I still wanted more. "I'll tell you what, if you load the house with beer and hook me and my friends up with free drinks at Drink Hive, I will cancel on Alice's parents." "You got it," Jack said. "I will text you the garage code on Thursday. What kind of beer do you want?" "A few cases of Modelo would do the trick. I can't watch Alfie if I'm dehydrated." "Thanks, Elliot. Tell Alice I say hi. I will talk to you later. Bye." I hung up the phone just as Alice walked into my apartment. "Hey babe, thank God work wasn't swamped. Today was bad enough." She walked over and sat down next to me on the couch. I kissed her on the temple, put my arm around her. I have to watch Uncle Jack's house this weekend. He has this dog, Alfie, that hates thunder. He is going to stock the house up with food and beer. He also has a hot tub. As I said the words hot tub, I slowly moved my hand down and grabbed her breast. My God, Alice was beautiful. 5'2", straight red hair, as smart as a whip. I don't know how a dork like me got so lucky. Alice slapped my hand away in a playful manner and mocked surprise. I have the night shift Friday. I'm guessing it will be busy. And isn't it supposed to be a lightning storm? She said with an overdramatic frown. The whole deck has a canopy over it. Plus, it would be nice to watch the storm while sitting in the hot water. There are no neighbors around either. I said this, reaching for her tits again. This time she didn't stop me. I rolled over with her on top of me. Her hair smelled so good. As I held her, Alice moved her mouth near my ear and whispered, I have a new bathing suit that you haven't seen yet. Don't bother, you won't need it. The rest of the work week passed as usual. I spent Thursday editing my work and getting a jump on next week's assignments. If I was going to be camping out at Uncle Jack's house, I wanted to treat it like a vacation. Everyone hates the work they will have to catch up on once they get back. I was about to call Alice before her shift when I got a text from Uncle Jack. The garage code is 84562. I have everything you asked for at the house. If you can, would you arrive by noon and give Alfie his breakfast? If not, no later than 2. I texted back, thanks, I will be there tomorrow at noon, and hit send. Nothing eventful happened the rest of the day. I called Alice before her shift and she came over after work. We went to bed early and got breakfast in the morning. You sure you are going to be okay in the house loaded with beer? Alice asked. What else am I going to do? I'll see if old Jack cares if I get some movies charged to his account, I said. You'll just have to look forward to Saturday, and don't you dare watch porn on your uncle's TV, Alice said, half joking. After breakfast, I kissed Alice goodbye and told her I would call her later. It was already drizzling and I headed over to Uncle Jack's house. The weather was going to be at its worst tonight and tomorrow morning. I pulled up at the house, entered the garage code, and pulled my car into one of the 3 garage bays. Uncle Jack only had 1 car, which he drove to the airport with Aunt Mary. The rest of the garage was open except for his 2 motorcycles in the furthest bay. Upon entering the house, I immediately noticed 2 cases of Modelo on the ground. Not satisfied, I opened the refrigerator to find 1 row lined with beer. That's more like it. I grabbed a beer and wondered if Uncle Jack thinks I'm an alcoholic. As I closed the refrigerator door, I noticed Alfie staring at me from the end of the laundry room hall. After Alfie was fed, I spent a few hours shooting pool, playing Jack's drums, drinking beer, and walking through the house. When it got dark out, I decided to look through Uncle Jack's movie collection. If he didn't have anything to watch, I most definitely was going to rent something. Luckily for Jack, I found a Blu-ray of World War Z. As I walked into the movie room, there was a huge bang of thunder. Alfie started howling and rain violently pelted the windows. This was the perfect setting to watch an action horror flick. Alfie came darting into the room and immediately jumped on one of the recliners. Good boy, I said as I turned everything on and opened the Blu-ray player. I was well into the movie when a sudden burst of thunder exploded and the whole house went black. I was annoyed by this because I was at the point in World War Z where Brad Pitt's family was going to get kicked off the aircraft carrier. I turned on my phone flashlight and shined it around the room. I could tell that Alfie was under the blanket on the other couch because of its perpetual shaking. With my light, I made my way into the basement to where I presumed the cable box would be. In my mind, I thought about how cliché it would be if something happened. I walked into the storage room in the back of the basement. With a sweep of the light, I found the cable box. I opened it up, turned all the switches off, waited 5 seconds, then turned everything on. To my delight, that's all it took for the lights in the house to turn back on. I was about to close the cable box door when I noticed a small sticky note on the bottom. It read, "Go to backyard shed for hot tub and deck electrical. Would a power outage shut down the heaters for the hot tub?" I was planning to use it with Alice tomorrow, so I figured I should check. I went back upstairs, put on my shoes, told Alfie he was a good boy, and grabbed an umbrella from the laundry room closet. The rain was torrential, and the shed was all the way in the back of the yard. As soon as I stepped outside, the umbrella immediately thrashed in my hand. Forgetting it, I closed and dropped it, jogging to the shed. I was almost at the door when I realized that it might be locked. To my delight, the handle turned and I pushed it open. I had never been inside of Uncle Jack's shed, but it had always been here. It was well kept on the inside and out. Summer games, yard chairs and lawn equipment lined the room. I scanned the walls for a circuit box and saw that there was another door in the back of the shed. "That doesn't make any sense," I said under my breath. The shed wasn't big enough for another room. I didn't find the power box, so I assumed the door was an electrical closet. I tried the handle, but to my annoyance it was locked. There was a very unusual lock attached to the door. The lock looked like it took a key with 3 pegs. I was about to call Uncle Jack and tell him about the possible power outage, but my phone read 12:42 a.m. I figured he was probably asleep in Fort Lauderdale. No use in bothering him. I just need to find the shed key. It's most likely in one of the kitchen drawers. Back in the house, I took off my soaked shoes and put the umbrella I had dropped back into the closet. I began my search, looking through the kitchen and laundry room cabinets for a shed key. I figured it would be close to the back deck entrance, but I couldn't for the life of me find it. My search expanded from the 2 rooms to the entire house. After checking every other drawer and cabinet in the house, it became obvious to me that it had to be in one of the 2 rooms I hadn't checked. Jack and Mary's room, or Jack's upstairs study. I didn't want to go in either of those rooms, because it felt like an invasion. I hesitated, but the thought of having sex with Alice was enough to convince me. I figured that I would check Uncle Jack's study first. This was always off limits when I visited as a child, so stepping in the room gave me a surreal feeling. I looked at the multiple bookshelves lining the walls. Small knickknacks rested on the giant desk in the center of the room. I walked around it and sat in the comfortable leather chair that faced the door. I wouldn't mind bringing my laptop in here and working in the comfort of Uncle Jack's study. Remembering what I was here for, I started opening his desk drawers. In the second of the 3 desk drawers, there was an envelope that had the words "safety box" on it. Inside the envelope was a small key that looked like it was for a microscopic lock. I thought about it for a second and realized this was the key to the fireproof box that probably had all of Jack and Mary's private documents. My parents had one as well, and it was always under the bed. Without thinking about invasion of privacy, I was about to commit. I entered the master bedroom and crouched underneath the bed. Unfortunately, when turning on my flashlight, I was met with a load of crap. Everything from gift wrapping paper, cardboard boxes, and fallen pillows littered the underside of the bed. If I was going to find the specific lockbox I was looking for, I was going to have to drag all of this crap out. I really did feel like giving up, but the idea of making out with Alice in the hot tub as the rain fell around us pushed me forward. Plus, I already invaded my uncle's privacy enough. Why give up now? I fell into a cycle of pulling out crap and looking underneath the bed with my light. On the 4th attempt, I noticed a small all-white box wedged against the wall at the head of the bed. Reaching under and grabbing it, I knew that I had found what I was looking for. As I sat on the trashed floor of Uncle Jack's bedroom, I popped the key from the desk into the lock and opened it. Inside the box were folded up documents, a handgun, a few mags of ammunition, and finally a wild-looking key that had 3 prongs sticking out from the sides. I didn't bother cleaning everything up. As soon as I had the key, I ran downstairs to the back deck doorway. After getting my shoes on, I made my way across the yard to the pitch-black shed. With my phone light guiding me, I walked to the locked door that made no logistical sense being there. I popped in the key and started spinning it around. After fidgeting with the lock for a few moments, I heard an internal click and the door opened outwards. I shined the light inside and was met with a completely empty room resembling a closet. The room only had space for a single person, and even then they wouldn't be able to stretch out their arms. What even is this room? I looked around at the walls to see if there was a fuse box, but there was nothing. I took a step into the small empty space. As my foot landed inside, I heard a muffled, almost hollowed sound. I stepped out and shined my phone light on the ground. The floor was wooden, opposed to the concrete floor in the rest of the shed. I got down on my hands and knees and started knocking. The floor was definitely hollow. I felt around and noticed that on the far left side of the floor there was a small pull tab. I awkwardly leaned over from the doorway and pulled up. The floor popped out of place, revealing a dark hole with a ladder. After sliding the door panel out of the way, I stared down into the hole for a few minutes. Several thoughts went through my mind, the most rational being that Uncle Jack had built a bomb shelter underneath the shed. I don't know why he hadn't told anyone in our family. It is weird that he would have built something like this and not mention it. I lowered myself on the ladder, balancing my phone flashlight as I went. The descent was less than 10 feet. As I stepped off the ladder, I felt softness underneath me. I shined my light and realized I was standing in a carpeted hallway, which opened up into a large concrete room. This is what I assumed was the bomb shelter, but there was no supplies or rations. I began to get the feeling that I had walked into something that I wasn't supposed to. At first glance, it looked like a room with tools. There were table saws, meat hooks, drills, and other miscellaneous construction tools. It wasn't until I shined my light at the wall and a light shone back at me that I started to understand. The entire wall and ceiling on the right-hand side of the room was a mirror. In view of these mirrors was what looked like a dentist chair. There were straps and chains that would keep anyone who was sitting in it completely immobile. Lining the other walls were similar racks of tools, knives, flick-open shaving razors, and bondage equipment. It was after doing a 360 of the room that I noticed something I hadn't initially. Right by the doorway that I walked in, there was a desk with multiple monitors and camera equipment. Leaning up against the desk was a tripod with a professional-looking camera on it. On the floor next to the desk, DVD cases stacked up to the waist level. I lifted up the first DVD and saw that it had a date on it. The one under it did as well. The DVD I was holding was dated approximately 2 weeks ago. I either didn't grasp what I was looking at, or I was in shock, because without fully realizing what I was doing, I started walking down the carpet halfway to the ladder. I was still holding the most recent DVD as I made my way out of the shed. From there I crossed the yard into the house, through the kitchen and straight into the movie room. I turned everything on, inserted the disc, and watched as the scene before me came into frame. In the center of the screen was my uncle. He was wearing a balaclava, but from his voice and body shape I could tell that it was him. Strapped to the dentist chair was a completely naked man. The man was gagged with duct tape and had a horrified look in his eyes. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," my uncle said, looking at the camera. "Tonight we have something very special. As was requested by user 462, we will now begin insertion of the catheter." Just as Uncle Jack finished saying this, 2 other men who I didn't recognize walked into shot. The taller of the 2 men produced a syringe from his pocket and stuck it into the man's penis. The man struggled against his restraints as he tried screaming. Almost immediately, the man's penis was erect. "We just injected Mikey here with a strong dose of Viagra," Uncle Jack said. "And if he keeps struggling, we're going to take another fan request." Mikey at this point passed out. I'm not sure if it was from Jack's reference or something in the Viagra injection. The shorter of the 2 henchmen started inserting a catheter into the man's erect penis. Except this wasn't hospital grade. This catheter looked like it had a small metal disc on the end. Once it was inserted, Uncle Jack produced some smelling salts from the table out of sight. Immediately the man woke up and started struggling again. With apathy in his eyes, he stared down at his genital area. "Now, ladies and gentlemen, with a push of this button, the metal at the end of the catheter will start rotating really fast. Now, Mikey, user 462 paid good money for this. Let's give him the show he deserves." Jack pushed the button and immediately Mikey started screaming. A small drill-like sound could be heard coming from inside Mikey's body. Right at the climax of Mikey's screams, Jack grabbed the external end of the catheter and ripped it out of Mikey's body. Amongst the screams and laughs as blood sprayed on screen, I ran to the bathroom, opened up the toilet, and immediately started throwing up. Tears began welling in my eyes as I replayed what I had just seen on TV. My Uncle Jack was filming himself torturing people. Why was he doing this? Who was he doing it for? What did user 462 pay my uncle to do something like this? As I laid on the bathroom floor, I heard the garage door start opening. Alfie immediately started barking and a cold chill went up my back. Who was here at the house? I quietly made my way upstairs as I heard the door that led from the garage to the laundry room open. I crept into the master bedroom as I heard a loud bang downstairs. Alfie was still barking and footsteps could be heard. I locked the master bedroom and grabbed the gun from the lockbox. I was about to start moving things to block the door when the power in the house cut out again. I instinctively reached for my cell phone, but I found my pockets empty. I must have left it in the movie room as I ran to go puke. A knock came from the other side of the bedroom door. "Hey, Elliot, I'm your uncle's neighbor, George. I live right down the street. Jack called me and asked me to check up on you. Do you mind coming out and talking to me?" Why would Jack ask someone to check on me? "Listen, Elliot, I don't know why you are locked in the bedroom. Is everything alright? I need you to leave before I call the police. I don't know who you are and I'm not expecting anyone." There was no response for a few seconds, and my hand tightened on the grip of the pistol. The voice started as a whisper and crescendoed into a shout. "Listen, you little shit! I know you don't have your phone. Let me in. The door started shaking as the man pounded on the door. Something came over me. My heart was racing and I had no idea what was going on. In the darkness, I raised the gun up. The man was now kicking or throwing his shoulder into the door. I fired 3 shots. The first shot hit the wall, but the flash from the barrel doused the room in light. I corrected my shot and hit the door with the second 2. The house fell into silent darkness. The police arrived at 2:32 a.m. The man who had attempted to break the door down was found dead outside the master bedroom. On his person, he had a syringe full of fentanyl, a roll of duct tape, and a switchblade. The whole house and shed were littered with police. I was taken to the police station to give a statement. Aunt Mary would claim she didn't know anything about what Jack was doing. She committed suicide before Jack's court date. Jack himself was given life in prison. He refused to give the name of the third person seen in the video. A few months after the whole ordeal, I started getting calls from a blocked number. I have no idea what any of it means, but I thought it would be worth sharing. The investigator later shared that the locked door in the back of the shed had a motion detector on it. As soon as I opened the door, my uncle got the notification. I have been in therapy since this all happened. My doctor diagnosed me with an anxiety disorder, and I have been prescribed Lexapro and Clonopin. I still have nightmares from the small bit of footage I did see. It is fair to say that my life has been turned upside down by the whole ordeal. I had never heard of the phrase Red Room before all of this. After a bit of research, I now understand that's what Jack was doing. I share this with all of you because Uncle Jack was a loved man. He was known and liked by most people. Everyone who came into his bar had nice things to say about him. You never really know someone as well as you think you do. Some of the nicest people you know may have the darkest secrets. My Uncle Jack was running a Red Room, and the third person who helped him is still out there. What the F happened in those woods? By Redditor, Calligrapher Pitiful 3. This is a true story, and I've been kind of obsessing over what the F happened out there. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible without leaving out key details. I grew up deep in the mountains of Shoshone County, an hour from a grocery store. The wilderness is my peace and my home, but these woods, they are evil. And I never should have come to Washington. My wife's Uncle Jay bought some land just north of Spokane, Washington, with a friend of the family, Kay. They got it at a significant discount because a nearby aluminium smelter had polluted the ground, and it was impossible to use the water beneath the ground. They had set up 2 plots and each had a camper to live in. Jay had been progressively getting paranoid and saying people were stalking him and watching him in the trees. About 3 months into living there, a man wandering through the woods there had an interaction with Jay and ended up attacking him and breaking his jaw. Upon being arrested, the man said he was overcome with a desire to see if he could kill him with a single punch. 2 months later, Jay was murdered in his sleep on the couch in his camper. Kay found him and immediately ran as far away until he stopped to call the police. There was sufficient evidence of who did it, and they quickly caught the killer, who was a 19-year-old boy who said he simply wanted his bike. He beat him to death with a power tool that was lying on the floor nearby and completely bashed his brains in. Kay was completely terrified at all times to be there alone. He had moved in with a family member until 8 months later he ended up with nowhere else to go and had to return. In constant fear, he finally convinced my pregnant wife and I to come stay with him. The second I turned off the highway onto the property, I was overcome with dread. There were at least 250 crows covering the dirt road up to the property. I didn't sleep whatsoever the first night. I stayed into the forest searching for the cause of my intense fear. The energy of this place was so uncomfortable, and I assumed it was simply just knowing my Uncle Jay was killed here. Even the days were eerie. Never did I have a moment where I didn't feel watched here. My wife and I always had a sense of fear, especially after dark. Things sort of normalized for a while until one day Kay began puking and feeling very lightheaded all the time. I took him to the hospital and they said he was fine, probably the flu. At this point, it was the anniversary of Jay's murder. 3 days after the date of Jay's death, Kay comes running out of his camper screaming, "I can't breathe!" waking my wife and I up, and we ran out to see what was wrong. Kay had gotten into his car and floored it, crashing into a nearby tree. I ran up and peered through the window to see the most intense and most primal fear I've ever seen in someone's eyes. He was gasping and clutching his chest. Moments later, he breathed out one last time, and he was dead. We gave him CPR for 30 minutes until EMS arrived. On July 10th, 1 year and 3 days after moving there with Jay, and they were both dead. Now it's only me and the wife alone on the property. Every moment living in fear and not understanding what had happened here. I don't know why we didn't leave right away. One day I came out to get fresh water from a drum we kept for water to smell the worst smell I'd ever smelt. The water container had a 1-inch opening on top, and inside the water were bits and pieces of chipmunks, like spines and heads. They didn't fall in. Something ripped them apart before putting them inside. I never saw anything other than shadows messing with my eyes, nearly always filled with unease and intense fear. Fear in the woods, even at night, is new for me. We all get a little spooked in the thick of the wilderness, in pure darkness, but compared to my home, this wasn't even a wilderness. The snapping of branches and pine needles crunching underfoot haunted me every night. The screeching owls loved to chime in right at the height of my anxiety. The nights were spent peering into the pines, watching, always waiting for whatever evil to present itself. I knew it was out there, and it wanted me to know it too. One night, my wife and I returned home to have the worst feeling I've ever felt. Every second driving up the long dirt road increased my anxiety tenfold. Something bad was ahead, and it was clear. The thick fog shrouded the pines. If it wasn't for the glimmer of the full moon, it would have been pitch black. Everything looked different. Although it was right where we left it, nothing seemed in place. Looking around, I suddenly see this orange, long-haired, manged cat sitting on a stump. This cat's eyes were so intense, fiery, almost glowing, but not quite. That cat, in my mind, was the embodiment of pure evil. I saw darkness in its soul. We start hearing branches snapping, pine needles crunching, seemingly from every direction. The brush was swaying back and forth, clearly indicating something was running within. Here I am, still staring at this cat, almost frozen in fear. Suddenly a voice breaks out, echoing through the forest. "Hello? Is anyone out here?" A little girl, I thought, but something was off. My gaze finally breaks with the cat, and my eyes dart towards the road. My wife yells back, "Hello? Are you okay? Anybody?" The voice had changed. "Help! Help me!" It was the same person, or thing, yelling, but as if it was trying to disguise its voice. We yelled back several times without response. "Somebody fucking help me!" The most intense, shrieking, evil-sounding voice of a woman cut deep into my body. I'm filled with more intense fear than I can ever describe, but my wife is overcome with a need to find this person, and she started to head off into the forest without a word. I grabbed her by the arm and tell her that something isn't right. Why won't she respond to us? She tries to break free from me, to go off alone. I tell her to get into the truck and I'll grab the spotlight. We aren't going on foot. We roll the windows down and shine my intensely bright LED lights throughout the forest. We slowly creep down the road, yelling back. As we get further down the road, the voice strikes out. "Please, won't anyone fucking help?" Sounds are difficult to pin down in the woods, but this one was very close. I hit the brakes and stop immediately. We shine the lights and yell back, searching. No sign of anyone, when suddenly the voice explodes into the cabin of the vehicle as if they were standing right outside my window. "Help! Help me! Somebody fucking help!" Leaving my ears hurting and ringing. I hit the gas and didn't look back. I called the police when I hit the highway, and afterward they said there was no one around. I picked up our stuff the next day, and my wife gave birth the following day. We never stayed there again after the baby was born. What the hell could do these things? I never even believed in paranormal things before, but I don't know, what else happened? We all had been blood tested while living there as well, and no toxic metal levels on either autopsy report. As simple as it seems, nobody had any poisoning whatsoever. What the F happened in those woods? 1, 2, 3 by Redditor Cyrus TV. This has happened before. I was a child. The dreams were all too real. I told this story about when I was a child. My mom's friend had died suddenly and she kept speaking to me in dreams. I told my mom that she needed to go see her, and when my mom, out of spite, decided to prove Jay was gone, she drove to her house, only to find her alive. I had no explanation, but strange things have been happening again after years of nothing. I'm trying to be rational, but I'm running out of excuses. I awoke at 3 a.m. to the smell of something burning. I tried to wake my wife, who was sleeping facing away from me. She was hot to the touch, and the moment I touched her, she rolled over and was engulfed in flames, screaming at the top of her lungs, fire bellowing out from her mouth and her eyes. In a panic, I tore myself out from the bed and ran to the kitchen that was attached to our bedroom. I tried to get water to put her out, and when I turned around, the whole room was engulfed in flames. I could not save her. I could only hear her screams. I knew I had to get our son out. There was nothing more I could do for her. As I made my way to my son's room, I could see an orange glowing light coming from the hallway. Its glow an indication of fire, but there was no sound. I then heard his door creak open and the light got brighter. My son was 2, almost 3 at this point, and what I saw will forever haunt me. He walked out engulfed in unnatural fire. No indication of pain or fear. He was singing 1, 2, 3. When he turned to face me, he said, "Look, Daddy, I'm burning," giggling with glee, and I knew that this wasn't my son. It sounded like him, but this wasn't him, and I ran as fast as I could out the door in fear. I made it down the walkway and I just fell to my knees in defeat as I saw my home and my family inside burning. It wasn't until I looked around me that I realized everything was burning. The skies were an unnatural orange. My neighbors and likely everywhere was in flames. I felt this burning sensation in my face as if I had been pepper sprayed, and I started crying and trying to claw the pain away. Suddenly, I began to laugh hysterically as I poured at my eyes, unable to stop. Or perhaps I didn't want to stop. This burning child stepped out of the front door as my eyes were engulfed in fire, but I could see him skipping happily down the walkway to the driveway where I was going mad. I finally stopped laughing on my hands and knees, and he stood next to me. When I looked up at him, he stretched out his hand saying, "It's almost here." I took it, and when I stood up, I realized that we were not alone. The entire neighborhood surrounded us, their faces charred, their eyes burning like red coals, and their bodies like zombies in a trance. We stood up and began to walk out of the neighborhood, all in tow, to some unknown destination. I awoke instantly at this point, literally jumping out of my bed straight to the bathroom. This horrible taste of ash in my mouth. As I tried swishing water in my mouth to stop it, I looked in the mirror to see that I was hot and burning with sweat, steam coming off my shoulders like I had just stepped out of a hot shower. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I was still dreaming or not. I calmed down long enough to look into our bedroom and see my wife still sleeping peacefully and okay. As I went to leave the bathroom, I heard a loud and clear 1, 2, 3, it's almost here. There was nobody there, but I could hear it as clear as you would as if it was standing right next to you. I hurried to my son's room. No glow, no sound. His door creaking open as I peeked in to see him sound asleep. I looked at the clock and it was 3 a.m. I didn't sleep again the rest of the night. I stayed on the recliner, traumatized and trying to process what the hell that was. I never told my wife or anyone. I felt as though I would be judged and decided to keep it to myself. I looked at everything I could, searching for meanings of the numbers, the meaning behind the dreams. The only thing I found that seemed to fit what I saw isn't what someone would want to see. Revelations 2, chapter 3, the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. I'm not religious, I've never read Revelations before, then this can't be it. 2019 came around and we had the pandemic. During this time, my wife's grandmother had developed lung cancer and was on her deathbed by 2020. During her time in hospice care, she told my wife that we were going to have a daughter. She died a few days later, and 2 weeks after this message, my wife was indeed already pregnant, but hadn't known. And a few weeks after that, we were told that it was a girl. The first girl in 35 years on my side of the family, and we were all shocked. So was the family, because her aunt and sister had heard her say it too. I was terrified something would happen to my wife because fire in my dreams can also mean rebuilding a new life. When my daughter was born, I was a mess. She was in the NICU for over a month, and my wife, after suffering through a terrible battle with preeclampsia, had to have a C-section, and she nearly died. It didn't dawn on me till after everything had settled that my daughter was born on January 23rd. I couldn't contain this anymore and had to tell her. Between her grandmother and my daughter's birthday, she lamented that this was indeed weird. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was all that it was, but it seemed so much more than just a prediction of a birthday. Fast forward a few years, my daughter nearly 2, when strange things were happening. My wife's sister believes in witchcraft. She practices it quite often, and superstition sometimes gets the better of you. She came to our house one day, and my alarm started acting weird. It's never made that sound before, and when I checked, it said a door we never used was open in the basement. I went down to check, and to my horror, I watched the door swing open and closed, and back open again and closed again. The door is always locked, as it's a secondary entrance to my house in the garage and my bonus room, and it's never used. Creeped out, I closed the door and locked it again. No wind gusts or anything downstairs to explain it, and I simply told them what I saw and that her sister needed to leave as she brought something in. Months went by and nothing, just enough to make you forget until the next one happens. This time my lights, all of them in the living room, blew out. I figured faulty wiring and I replaced them. Strange noises on our back porch that I couldn't explain, other than a stray cat. Fast forward to Saturday morning, around 2 a.m, my air fryer cut on by itself and we heard it all the way from our bedroom. I went to investigate. All the lights were on and the thing was going full blast and could have caught fire because it was set to run its maximum time at maximum temperature. I turned it off and unplugged it. Then I heard it again. It's almost here. I still haven't told my wife. I'm beginning to think that it wasn't her sister that let something in, and all the strange things that seem to happen only when I'm around, I'm beginning to think that it's me. I Got Lucky by Redditor unkempt_butler574. A man broke into my house about 8 years ago. I didn't know he was there, neither did my older brother. My parents were gone for the week, somewhere in Colorado, visiting family. It was just us there. 3 days went by, and we were just as bored as the night they left. Nobody was allowed to come over. My brother couldn't take the car. We were stuck at the house until they got back. We had enough food to last us the week. We spent most of the days reading or watching TV or trying to make board games fun with 2 people. It was fun, but I was ready for the week to end. I was 10 years old, and my brother was about to turn 17. The sun had set and we were trying to find a movie to watch when my parents called my brother. They asked how the house was, if we'd been having people over, and if I was cleaning up after myself. I listened from the other end of the couch, and when I heard the last question, I immediately stood up and made my way to the bathroom to shower. As I walked up the steps, I could hear my brother say bye to my parents. "Don't start the movie without me," I shouted to him. "Then hurry up," he shouted back. I think that was the last time I heard his voice. Our shower was nice and heated up quickly. I remember how nice the water felt. I remember the water running into the silver grate at the bottom, the noise it made when I finished up, the quiet rushing of water and the slow drip when I shut it off. I dried off and put on some old sweatpants and a hand-me-down shirt my brother gave me. I made my way out of the room when I heard some slamming from downstairs. It shocked me, like when a sledgehammer hits a wooden floor. I called out for my brother. The slamming stopped. I made my way to the bottom of the steps and peeked around the wall towards the living room. There was a large man standing over my brother, tied to a chair around his chest and ankles. Blood was running down his face. There was a pool of blood at the man's feet, his own, by the looks of it. There was a small creature next to the man too. It was chunky and fleshy, like a caterpillar with skin. It was about my height and was shuddering next to the man. There was blood rubbed on its back. I gasped when I saw the creature. The man turned around. He saw me and yelled, blood oozing out of where his nose used to be. He pointed a bloody finger at me, the other hand holding his severed flesh. I ran up the stairs and the man screamed for me to stop. I heard him stumble, then make his way up the stairs. I ran into my room and locked the door, then into my bathroom and did the same. I squeezed myself between the toilet and the glass shower wall. The man ran into my door and yelled when I wouldn't open. I sighed for a moment until I heard more slamming as he kicked my door in. "Come out, boy!" the man screamed. I jumped. knocking over the toilet lid with a loud thud. The man kicked my bathroom door in with ease and saw me cowering by the shower. His body filled the frame of the door. Blood was splatting onto the floor, his face a deep, muddy red. I began crying when I saw the white tip of bone protruding from his face. He flashed a rotten smile and grabbed me by the hair. I screamed and kicked, but the man was able to lift me with one hand. He looked around, saw the silver shower grate, and threw me on top of it. "Hush, boy," the man said. "This will hurt." The man pushed my head into the metal shower drain, still wet. He moved himself next to me and started dragging my face along the grate. Back and forth, the grate tugged at my cheek until I felt a white-hot gash across my face. The man went on for another minute until I could hear the ungodly sound of my cheekbone tapping the metal. Then a humming filled the house. I couldn't hear my own screaming. The house started shaking. The man shot up and ran towards the stairs. I couldn't hear anything. I was getting dizzy with the blood loss. I couldn't get up. I touched my face and felt something similar to minced meat. I passed out shortly after. As my eyesight went black, the humming turned into a voice, deep and far away. "Pain in blood," they said. "Be restored." I woke up in the hospital, my mother holding my hand. They cried when I spoke to them. I asked them what happened, and they said a neighbor heard a party or something from our house. Apparently the neighbor found the door kicked in, blood everywhere, and me in the shower with a cut on my face. I reached up to feel my face and felt a small divot of a scar where my face had recently been mangled. My mother hugged me, and the rest is history. I went home a few days later. We never found my brother. They never found the man without a nose. They had no evidence of a little flesh creature in the house. Nothing to suggest that the man had used the shower drain as a cheese grater for my face. All the blood, all the pieces of me I felt get shredded, gone. I never got an answer for what happened. Never heard from the voices again. Nothing. So now I run my fingers over the scar from that night and pray to find my brother one day. I know I probably never will, but I've gotten lucky before. From the Deep by Redditor Unkempt Butler 574. It couldn't have been a more relaxing day for David. The sun was reflecting off the glossy white finish of the ship. It was brand new and hurt his eyes a little if he looked at it too long. He was so proud that he could finally say that this was his ship. After years of sucking up and working his ass off, often on other people's ships, he could finally call this one his own. He and his wife boarded early in the morning, with his hired crew rushing around to make sure that they had everything they needed for their weekend at sea. For David, this was his computer, some cigars, and a few bottles of champagne. His wife, Melissa, just needed the champagne, maybe some Benadryl. Their marriage was a solid one from the start. David was the best friend of the brother of Melissa's best friend. They had known each other for years before they realized they both wanted the same things in life. No kids, jobs that pay way too much, and friends that would keep their life interesting. And they achieved just that. Lately, David had been on edge over the past few months. His job had been hedging him about the possibility of promoting him, which was a respectable feat. The position was that of a VP of international finance for a large conglomerate. David wasn't entirely sure what their company did, but he knew it was mostly oil and deep-sea mining. All the hard work he had put into getting to know his insufferable higher-ups led him to eventually getting that promotion, which came with a bonus. That bonus was his ticket into a club of sorts, as all the VPs in the company used it to buy their first yacht. So David was a yacht guy now. He didn't mind at all since he could just pay people for the upkeep of the ship. He was more excited. This meant he could spend time with Melissa while also keeping up with his work. His company allowed their VPs to work from home, but most of them used that time to travel around the world while making a few calls a week and sitting in on meetings here and there. As David stepped foot on the ship, he could already feel the tension that usually enveloped his body leave, slowly at first, but once the boat started moving, it was entirely gone. He was at peace, and he was with his wife. There was nothing more he could wish for. David and Melissa spent the first day inside the cabin, drinking and catching up and laughing like they did when they were younger. Melissa hadn't seen David this relaxed in years. She remembered why she fell for him. A goofy blonde dork with a tendency to get loud when he gets excited. He liked The Lord of the Rings and rap music that would make his mother faint. Lately though, he had been more interested in the news and celebrity gossip and cultural issues. His job had taken his intelligence and talent and turned him into a drone, spouting facts about whatever his boss had shown the slightest sense of interest in. It was sad to watch, and even worse to be married to. But Melissa was determined to get through it. She would fill the space where he used to be goofy whenever he was upset. In those moments, she saw that spark of his personality flare up, and her love for him swelled even more. She knew he cared about this job, cared about her, so much so that he was changing his nature to get to where they could both enjoy it. After moments like that, she had no problem staying. She was just counting down the days when she could see her husband again. And he was back. The first day on the ship was the most fun she had in years. The boat swayed back and forth as they danced, and she felt home. "They will do." A mass moved and spoke to itself beneath the ship. The second day of their trip was beautiful. They set sail from Port Canaveral and started their small loop towards the Bahamas and back. Today was their last full day at sea, and David wanted to spend it soaking in the sun. They scheduled a small stop so that David could get some swim time in before calling it a day. The sun was high above as the boat slowed and then stopped. Melissa was in the room, hungover and probably a little motion sick. The water was choppy today, but that didn't bother David. He put on his life jacket, fastened his tether to the ship, and jumped into the water. It was warm. The waves were higher than he thought. The first few washed over his head as he was getting himself positioned closer to the ship. The water seemed to be tugging at him, as if trying to fight him and keep the tether tight. He gave up trying to get close to the ship. He floated on his back with his eyes closed, smiling as he bobbed up and down with the waves. He was in that golden state of near sleep when he stopped bobbing. David opened his eyes and noticed that the waves had stopped. The surface of the water was glassy. Before he could examine this further, something wrapped around his leg. Before he could fight it, he was pulled under the surface. His tether snapped instantly. He couldn't see how fast he was going, but he couldn't bring his arms down to fight whatever was gripping him. He could feel the pressure crushing him more and more. Finally, his descent slowed and his leg was free. He looked up only to see darkness. No light from the surface. He looked around to the same effect, but something was moving around him, all around him. His brain was pounding, and his vision was fading. He was going to die. There was a small release of pressure around him, and he could breathe again. After coughing up all the water he had sucked in on his way down, David looked up and wished he had died instead. It was a mass of black. They had circled him. Then they began to speak.
"You will have one message to send to the surface. You may send it to whomever you like. Once this message is sent, you will die, and I will ravage your world. The time has come. Pray to your God in hopes that he is anything but me."
David wished he could wake up from this. He wanted to ask why, but he felt like this wasn't the time to negotiate. His message was ready.
"This is your final message?"
David nodded and fell to his knees.
"Very well."
The angel was of its word. David was torn apart. His message was sent to the surface. Melissa woke up to the sound of thunder. The boat was rocking rhythmically, tossing her head from side to side. She sat up. "David?" She rubbed her eyes, still in a daze. The rocking was getting more violent now. She struggled out of bed, the constant motion beginning to make her feel dizzy. Melissa noticed her entire body shifting to keep in balance, reminding her of those people that would lean towards the front of the tram as it accelerated. She always had to stifle a laugh when she saw it. No way she was laughing today. As she staggered to the door, a glass broke on the floor next to her feet. It was a bottle of blackish-green glass. The pieces lay scattered around a small, crumpled piece of paper. It looked old. Melissa wondered if this was a surprise from her husband. Melissa fought the urge to smile as she picked up the letter. Her brow furrowed as she read the smudged ink. "It is coming. Tell someone. I love you." The words burned into her mind, but she couldn't make any sense of them. Melissa pulled out her phone and called her mom. Not that she would know what to do. Melissa read the note to her mom. There was silence on the other end. Before she could get another word out, there was a noise coming from outside. Melissa hung up the phone and headed towards the door. As she reached for the handle, Melissa was knocked to the ground. Her face hit the floor hard. There was another noise outside, the lurching and groaning of tearing metal. This storm was getting dangerous. The cabin was undoubtedly the safest place to be in a situation like this, but she had to find David. As she stepped out of the cabin, a torrent of water washed over her. Her sweatpants and shirt were soaked immediately. Melissa was shivering. She looked out over the back of the ship. "David!" she yelled. Melissa could hardly hear herself. She tried looking for him and his neon yellow life jacket to no avail. The rain slowed just enough for her to notice a strange texture of tar black ocean before her. It was shimmering. It looked about ready to boil. The water began to do just that as a black mass of planetary proportions burst from below the surface, destroying the yacht, killing Melissa instantly. Her body lay to rest next to her husband at the bottom of the ocean.
I wish the man had called upon more of a challenge,
the angel thought. Its body flexed and writhed after millennia of rest. The angel was ready to undo the civilization that had risen from the ashes of his last catharsis. He was ready to strike down the will of God's people. He had forgotten how easy the ocean was to surpass. The fear that humans had with it was astounding. He was the reason for their fear. The ocean was his domain, and it was now time to expand his reign. A storm bellowed behind the angel as it moved, black clouds and blood-red scars of lightning following him like a growth of world-ending mold. The angel saw the coast. He could already hear the screams, taste the blood, feel their suffering on every surface of his body. He was already selecting the few that he would let see his face, who he would let survive to rebuild, to tell the story of Leviathan. The Tunnels Deep Down by Redditor Vulkath. As I am making my way to school, I come up to a storm drain and hear a wet, high-pitched gurgling noise coming from it. Just as I'm about to investigate, something grabs my shoulders from behind and screams. Did I scare you? It was my buddy Zach. And yes, he did scare me. We both laughed and headed to school, cracking jokes the entire way there. He made fun of me for being such a scaredy cat. After class, while we were walking home, I asked Zach if I can see that matchbox he's been playing with. He passes it to me. Zach then asks if he could take a look at my dad's watch, which I had become very attached to after he passed away. Naively, I ended up trusting him and handed it over. Zach smiled and tossed it down the same storm drain we walked past earlier in the day. "Dude, what the hell?" I exclaimed. Zach told me to grow up and stop being so afraid of life, saying I should face my fears and go get it. I hated that storm drain, and he knew it. But that watch is the last thing to remember my dad by, and I absolutely can't afford to lose it. With a deep breath, I push myself to go. I don't see it near the entrance, and I'm not going any deeper. Then suddenly Jack pushes the hatch gate closed behind me. He's a lot stronger than me, so for him it's easy. No matter how much I try to force it back open, it's no use. I yell at him, asking what the hell is seriously wrong with him. He just laughs and says if I keep going straight, I'll reach the other side. If I can't find it today, he'll help me tomorrow. I stress to him that this isn't funny and I have a serious phobia of the dark. He just scoffs and says that after today, I'll find out there's nothing to be afraid of, and he walks off home while I bang on the bars of the storm drain gate he trapped me in, screaming for my life. I slam and scream on the bars, hoping anyone would hear me. I must have been doing it for a while because the sun was starting to go down. Shit, this isn't good. Hopefully it's not too long of a tunnel. I turn on my phone flashlight and see something big skitter away quickly into the dark. I let out a scream and drop my phone in fear, causing it to short out and die. Fuck! Looking back at the entrance, the sun is fully set and now it's dark on both sides. I'm trapped, but if I just keep moving forward, hugging the wall, then eventually I'll find my way out like Zach said. Oh, I'm going to get him back for this. As I'm moving further in, I start to hear wet, high-pitched gurgling sounds. I stay in place, petrified in fear, unable to move. I was already scared just because of my phobia of the dark. But then something touches the back of my neck and I scream, running like I've never run before, splashing through the murky water beneath my feet, flailing in panic, while tears stream down my face. I can't think straight and I just want to be safely home, in my bed, getting ready to sleep with my lights on as usual. This is a nightmare. It has to be. Before I know it, I trip on something and fall down a shaft. I hit the ground really hard and writhe in pain for a few minutes. In these few minutes, I remember Zach's box of matches that I asked to look at earlier today. I forgot to give it back to him. As I go to light a few matches, some being duds, one finally catches and I see something looking directly at me, making eye contact an inch away from my face. I drop the matchbox, kicking and screaming bloody murder. I wait and don't hear any movement. Then start carefully searching for the matchbox I just dropped. Aha, I found it. Okay, I take a deep breath. With a few more failed tries, a flame catches. The area becomes illuminated. I seem to be alone. Did I just imagine that thing? Whatever it is, I need to get the hell out of here, making my way around the area I just fell into. I take a tunnel that seems to have some sort of light in the distance. As I make my way to it, the light goes out. What the heck? Is someone else down here with me? I try to move further in where I saw the light, but it just leads to more tunnels. It feels like I've been walking forever. Proceeding deeper in, a valve starts making a sound next to my head. I turn to look at it, wondering what's wrong, when it bursts open, spraying my eyes with hot steam. I scream really loudly in pain, dropping the matchbox, unable to see anything. I just start hugging the walls like I did when I first wandered in here. Someone from the distance calls out my name, and I hug the walls blindly, trying to quickly move towards it. Zach! I called out, finally hopeful that I'll get to go home and put an end to this nightmare. The voice gets clearer as I make my way towards it. It's my dad. But how's that possible? My dad's voice calls out my name again and I scream, running to it. Dad, I'm here! I'm right here! Please help me! I'm so lost and scared! I open my arms wide, waiting and hoping for my dad to hug me and save me from this place. A wet, high-pitched gurgling noise comes up from behind me.
I am an EMT, and sometimes I choose who lives or dies. By Redditor and Somnia. We received a call from dispatch. The husband called in stating his wife had fallen down the stairs and was now unresponsive. With sirens blaring, we made it to the home rather quickly. In an instant, we were out of the ambulance and moving towards the front door of the home. On the porch stood a man and two small children. He held on to them tightly. Both children had tears streaming down their faces and made loud cries, undoubtedly aware that something had happened to their mother. The man, on the other hand, had a blank expression on his face, 1,000-mile stare in his eyes. My partner and I asked where the woman was as we rushed through the porch and in the front door with our stretcher. He gave a vague point in the direction of a staircase that was just out of view down a long hallway. My partner and I continued our swift pace through the home. We sped through the hallway, our feet crunching over the broken glass from what appeared to be a framed photo that lay face down on the floor. The woman was an awful sight to behold. She wore a white silk nightgown that must have come up over her head in the fall, covering the top half of her body. My partner reached down and pulled the nightgown back down over her legs, revealing that the fall was worse than we thought. It looked like there was no effort made to help her after she had fallen. There was a wall directly in front of the staircase, and her head rested with her right cheek pressed hard against the wall, and her neck was bent at an unnatural angle. She was bleeding heavily from the back of her head, and she had heavy bruising on both of her arms. Her legs lay splayed across the bottom two steps of the stairs, battered and bruised as well. Before moving her, we needed to be sure we still had a chance to save her. I got down on a knee next to her mangled body and grabbed the arm that was closest to me and felt her wrist for a pulse. Miraculously, there was a faint one. I gestured to my partner and we moved quickly but carefully. We lowered the stretcher to the ground and gently turned the woman over onto her back. I noticed blood dripping from her nose and that her right eye was swollen and black. My partner and I tried to handle her as softly as possible as we lowered her down onto the stretcher. We placed straps over her chest and legs and lifted her off the ground. The wheels extended as we hastily carted her out of the front door. We sped past the husband, who had not moved a muscle since we came in, and to the ambulance that was parked alongside the road in front of the beautiful suburban home. As we opened the doors and began loading the woman up into the ambulance, one of the children broke free from their father's grasp and ran to me. Shortly after the first escaped, so did the second. Before I knew it, I had 2 young children clinging to me, one on each leg. I looked down and could see the pain and fear in their eyes. "Please!" they both yelled in unison. "Please save our mom. Don't leave us alone with him." A police officer who had arrived on the scene shortly after us ran over and grabbed both children by the hand. He pried them off of my legs and began guiding them back up the driveway to their father. I paused for a moment and looked at the man. "Don't leave us alone with him," I thought to myself. My partner yelled at me to jump in, and I snapped out of my daze. We began hooking her up to a heart monitor, putting on her oxygen mask, and starting an IV. The heart monitor was not looking promising, and it looked like she could flatline at any minute. The faces of this woman's children begging for me to save their mother flashed before my eyes vividly. She wasn't going to make it. We had at least a 15-minute drive to the hospital at this point, and based on my experience, she'd be dead long before that. I gave my partner a look, and he immediately understood what it meant. "This one? Really? Are you sure?" he said to me with a nervous tone. "You didn't see how those kids looked at me. I can't let this one die knowing I could have done something about it," I said, the words the children said to me still repeating in my head. "Fine, I get it," my partner said as he reached into a medical cooler we had on the floor and pulled out a bag of blood. Being in this line of work, I, of course, had to learn to control myself, but after kneeling down next to the woman and seeing the blood from the back of her head pouring out onto the stretcher, I allowed my urges to get the best of me. My eyes went black, but all I could see was red. I felt a dull ache in my gums and teeth. My mouth began to water. It had been a while. I heard my partner make his usual soft squeal as I sunk my teeth into the woman's neck. When I did, my mind went blank. Admittedly, I probably drank much more than I needed to. Just before I was about to stop, something unusual happened. My mind went from blank to hearing faint yelling that grew much louder the longer I drank. I wanted to let go, but I needed to know what was happening, so I continued. Suddenly I found myself standing in a hallway. I looked around and took a step forward and felt a crunch of glass under my feet. I glanced down and saw the framed photo my partner and I had raced past while coming into the woman's home. What is this? Why am I back here? I thought to myself. That's when I heard the yelling again, this time much louder and coming from right above me. "Let me go, you asshole! I'm taking the boys and you'll never see them again, I swear to God," the woman yelled frantically. I tried to move down the hall as fast as I could, but as soon as I reached the base of the stairs, I heard a man grunt and an ear-ringing scream from the woman. I was too late. I heard the woman's body begin tumbling down the stairs violently, and with a disgusting thud, she slammed into the wall at the bottom of the stairs right in front of me. There she laid in the harrowing position that my partner and I found her in. I took a step closer to the bottom of the stairs and craned my neck around the corner. I looked up at the top of the stairs, and there stood the husband. He was breathing heavily, with the same blank look on his face I had seen before. Just then my vision went black. I started to hear more yelling, this time coming from my partner. He had his hand on my shoulder and was shaking me as hard as he could. "Hey man! Hey! You have to stop!" my partner shouted at me. I came back to my senses and realized I was still draining this poor woman's neck. I pulled away quickly and my back slammed into the side wall of the ambulance. "What the hell was that? I've never seen you like that before. Are you alright?" I heard him, but I wasn't listening. All I could think about was what I had just seen. "Give her the blood," I said. My partner looked at me. He must have noticed my serious demeanor and did not hesitate. He leaned over the woman on the stretcher, took a knife, and poked a small hole in the blood bag. He placed the bag on the woman's lips and began squeezing it slowly, letting the blood dribble out into her mouth. I stood up and watched the process closely. When people are on the verge of death, the process doesn't always work. I found myself hoping that this transition would be successful more than any other I've done in the past. After a moment, the color began to return to her pale face, and I knew she would make it. "I'll never get used to this part," my partner said with a hand over his mouth. That's when the bones in her neck and spine began to shift, putting themselves back in place with the sickly thuds and cracking sounds that I had grown accustomed to. The bruises on her arms and shoulders began to disappear. Her fingers began to move, slowly at first, then faster. My partner let out another squeal as her hand shot up and snatched the blood bag from his grasp. She began squeezing it as tightly as she could until all that was left was the red tint on the plastic. Suddenly her eyes opened wide and she tried to sit up, but she was strapped down to the stretcher. My partner reached for the straps to undo them, but I held out my hand to stop him. She looked around the inside of the ambulance with a scared urgency. "What the hell is this? Where am I?" the woman yelled frantically. "You're in an ambulance. We responded to a call from your husband. He said you fell down the stairs." "Do you remember what happened?" my partner asked her. The woman closed her eyes and put the palms of her hands on her forehead like she was thinking as hard as she could. Then she pulled her hands away from her face, and her expression had changed from scared and nervous to furious and bloodthirsty. Emotions are always heightened after a fresh transition. She leaned forward in the stretcher as hard as she could, and the buckles began to loosen and the straps were starting to tear. I stood up and banged on the wall behind the driver's side of the ambulance, which was our signal to pull over. The woman was almost completely out of her restraints when the ambulance came to a stop on the side of the road. I walked over to the back doors and opened them up. Not a single street light in sight. Woods on both sides of the road. Darkness as far as the eye could see. I stepped to the side and watched the woman finish ripping the restraints clean off of the stretcher. She looked over at me and I gave her a nod. I watched through the back doors of the ambulance as she disappeared into the night. I closed up the back doors and gave another loud bang on the driver's side wall, letting him know we were ready to hit the road again. A few minutes later we arrived at the hospital. My partner and I jumped out of the back doors and began pulling out the now damaged stretcher to replace it before the next call. As we loaded up the new stretcher, I heard the driver's side door swing open and slam shut. The driver came around the back of the ambulance and gave my partner and I a worried look. "What is it?" I said. "Just got a call from dispatch. Said all they could hear was a man screaming for help. The call came from the same address as the last one." I smiled.
2 years ago, my friend went missing from a hotel. I've been looking for her ever since. Written by Redditor Jamie Francis P. I'm sharing this because if I don't come back, well, the more people that know what happened, the better. Maybe then someone will finally believe us. Every year since our college graduation, my best friend Liz and I would go on vacation together and visit a new city. As we were planning the trip for late summer 2021, she got an email saying she'd earned a free week-long stay at a hotel. She tends to travel a lot for business, so it's not too unusual for her to get a free night every now and then. One of the locations she could redeem it at was somewhere we hadn't been before, and it looked ritzy. It sounded perfect. As soon as we walked into the lobby though, something felt off. I don't know how to explain it, other than that it had weird vibes. It looked like an old building that had been recently renovated, but the bright colors, lights, paintings, it felt like someone just slapped a thin, cheery veneer over decades worth of caked-on misery. The air just felt heavy. Liz didn't seem to notice it, at least not at first. The guy at the check-in desk stared at us for a while before muttering that he needed to talk to his manager. We were a bit worried that we were about to hear that the email she'd received had been a scam, but to our relief, he came back with a grin and said that they'd upgraded our room. The city skyline and faint mountains in the distance that we could see from our window won me over. That first day was fine, but when I woke up the next morning, Liz was sitting motionless on her bed, her back to me. Liz? I repeated her name several times before finally walking over to tap her on the shoulder. Hey! She finally turned to me, spoke quietly as if someone else might be listening. Did you hear it last night? I shook my head. Oh. She looked embarrassed for a moment, like she was unsure if she should continue. I couldn't sleep. Not with a scratching behind the wall, she whispered eventually. I don't like it. I'm a heavy sleeper, a bit too heavy, honestly. At home, where it's just me, I have to set multiple alarms to make sure I wake up on time for work. And I've literally slept through a fire alarm once. Luckily it was a false alarm. Liz was the opposite. Every little noise would wake her. So she always tended to have a rough first night or two as she became accustomed to the new sounds of a place. I thought maybe after a couple of nights she'd get used to it, or chalk it up to the building settling, especially in such an old place. I'd offered to ask for a different room, but she was worried that they'd charge us. She said just try and ignore it. The day before we were supposed to check out though, she shook me awake. Her eyes were wide and frantic as she stood over me. She'd moved her nightstand aside and was pointing at a small door 3 or so feet tall that had been behind it. The door was old-looking, dark wood with an antique knob and stood in contrast to everything else in the bright and modern-looking room. Did you open it? She looked at me like I was out of my mind for even asking and backed away as I approached it for good measure. I figured that once we looked, we'd both feel better. I was wrong. As I carefully pushed it open, the smell of rust and bleach hit me immediately. The narrow space was long. It went further back than my phone light could reach from where I stood. After a few feet, it faded into blackness. Since it was only as tall and wide as the small door, I realized I'd have to crawl on my hands and knees to see how far it went back. I hate being in the dark and can't stand small spaces, but when I looked over my shoulder at Liz and saw the bags under her eyes, the expression on her face, I figured I owed it to her to at least take a look. So, I crawled in. Once I was a few feet inside, I saw that the small and narrow space ended at another wall, one plastered in yellowing wallpaper. It looked so old, I guessed it was probably a part of the original hotel. The dark, patterned carpet was dotted with stains, which seemed to be contributing to at least part of the strong smell. As I backed out, I thought I heard a faint whisper coming from behind the old wallpaper in front of me. As soon as I was all the way out, I had to fight the urge to slam the door shut and run. It felt so wrong in there. I wasn't sure what the purpose of that space had once been, but even then I knew it was nothing good. "Hey," I whispered as soon as the door was closed, as I tried to nonchalantly move the end table back in front of it. "Why don't we pack up? We can find a different hotel for tonight." She seemed a bit calmer, said she could hang in there for the final night. After having been in that small space behind our wall, the thought of sleeping there another night honestly freaked me the hell out, but I figured that if she could make it through the last night, then so could I. After we turned out the lights that night, I remember seeing her dark silhouette sitting on the edge of her bed, motionless, until I fell asleep. That was the last time I ever saw her. When I woke up, it was almost noon. Both of our alarms were blaring. We were supposed to check out hours earlier. My confusion quickly turned to panic when I realized Liz wasn't in the room. Her suitcase, purse, phone, everything was still there. The main door was locked and chained from the inside too. At first, I couldn't think of where else she could be, until it hit me. There was one place I hadn't checked. The nightstand was still in front of the door, but I was fairly certain that it was in a slightly different spot than we had left it the day before. Reluctantly, I slid it aside. "Liz?" No answer. She wasn't there. I did see, though, what I'd thought had been a wall was open slightly. I pushed it tentatively and took a sharp breath when I saw it led into a tunnel. It went so far back, far beyond the reach of the beam of my phone light, it looked endless. "Liz?" I got no response other than my own voice echoing back through the narrow space. I tried to tell myself that it would be okay. I had to go in, especially if Liz had gone in there too. I took a deep breath, nudged the false wall open all the way, and I entered. As I crawled on my hands and knees with my phone ungracefully held between my teeth, I tried not to think about the tight space and the pitch blackness as far as I could see in front of me, or picture what Liz would have been doing down there. I tried to not focus on the streaks of nearly dried blood along the floor. I had to keep going. I knew that Liz would do the same for me. I realized that I wasn't even sure how long she had been gone for. I promised myself the walls were not shrinking around me. It was my imagination. That this dark expanse couldn't go on forever. Eventually, the tight darkness would end. I kept repeating it to myself over and over as a mantra, just to keep myself going, to try and distract myself from the feeling of despair that seemed to fill the place. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel ended, opening into a room without lights or windows. But it was at least large enough that I could stand and stretch out my cramped muscles. All I could make out was wall-to-wall, dark, crumbling bricks, and a weak-looking set of stairs that led above and below. It was so quiet there, so eerie. It was easy to forget that I was in a city packed with people, still inside a bustling hotel. When I shined my light upwards into the pitch blackness above my head, I could see the stairs leading to another platform like the one I was standing on. It looked like the rooms above and below ours had similar tunnels. The smell of bleach had long been replaced by the scent of mildew and old things. It felt so wrong back there, in a way that I couldn't put my finger on, that I couldn't help but shiver when wondering why it had been designed that way. What had it been used for? I assumed the stairs to the tunnels above me all led to other rooms, so I went down, the protesting metal echoing up into a huge empty space above my head. I finally reached a heavy door, and after being in the dark for so long, the bright sunlight hurt my eyes when I opened it. I was looking into the back alley outside, around the corner from where the hotel seemed to end. The door was covered with the same bricks as the rest of the building. It was so discreet that when I closed it behind me, it blended in perfectly with the outside wall. I remember running back inside and bracing myself against the counter while I tried to convey what I'd found to anyone that would listen. I still have the image in my mind of how the dried blood on my palms stood out starkly on the white marble. It was all I could focus on as the manager tried to calm me down. He said Liz probably just wandered off. People go off on their own all the time to explore the city, he told me. She'd likely come back later. She never did. I was the one that called the police, and the officer that came out chatted casually with the hotel manager for a long time. They checked the room, I showed him the door, but he didn't seem concerned. He just repeated what the manager said. Maybe she decided to start over and didn't want to be found. I was hysterical. Pointed out that her purse and her phone were still in the room. She hadn't even taken her shoes. It's not uncommon, he told me, leaning in a little too close. A warning less subtle than his words was written across his face, for people to visit a city like this and never leave. I drove around for hours, asking shop owners and people outside if they'd seen her. None of them had. Eventually I had to go home, back to work. The official story is still that she just left of her own volition. I don't believe it, neither does her family or fiancé. Every so often he and I would drive up there, just on the off chance that anyone had seen her, but we'd always get the same answer. He's the one that had the idea to book the same room again, to see what we could find in the tunnels. He must have called dozens of times. He'd try to make a reservation, ask if room 347 or any of the rooms directly above it are available, and they'd always tell him no. We hadn't lost all hope, but we'd certainly lost most of it, until a few days ago. I recently received an email invite letting me know I'd earned a free week, just like the one Liz received 2 years ago. I went to check in, and after looking me over, the guy manning the desk said he needed to get his manager. The manager, the same one as before, came out in person, and I was so worried he turned me away, but he simply smiled and informed me that my room had been upgraded. I'm sure you can guess my room number. I've been trying to stay awake each night, although after everything that happened, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep here, even if I wanted to. Every night I've just been sitting in the dark, listening to the sounds coming from behind that awful door. Sounds that I could almost swear are a bit louder, a bit closer, each night. I'm supposed to check out tomorrow morning. I have a feeling that tonight I'll finally find out what happened to Liz. Wish me luck. My dad disappeared for 2 weeks and came back. I'm not sure if he's my dad anymore. Written by Redditor, Mr. M.
How could you do this, Ethan? How? I loved you, Ethan. I gave you all I had, and in the end you do this? Shut up!
I want a divorce. My dad stormed out of the house. I still remember that night vividly. I was 13. I was playing on my Atari as my parents started to argue. My father cheated. My mother was obviously angered. She wanted a divorce, but my dad stormed out of the house the moment she said that. A relaxing but dreadful silence filled the house. What will happen now? Will I never see my dad again? The silence was broken by my mother's soft cries. I tried to comfort her, but she just yelled at me to go back to my room. I went back to my room, sobbing quietly. I felt as if all those memories that I had with my parents were being torched right in front of me. One question repeated itself inside my head over and over again. Will I ever see my father again? I eventually stopped crying and went to bed. I woke up the next morning. It was a Saturday, so I didn't have to go to school. I put my favorite game in the Atari and started playing it. A few hours passed until I heard my mom's voice.
Breakfast's ready.
I slowly got up and went to the living room. I sat on my chair as my mom placed food on the table. Instead of the regular family conversation, all I heard was dreadful silence. Without a word between me and my mother, we ate and went back to our rooms. My life went on this way until 12 days after my dad's disappearance. I was eating breakfast when I heard a knock on the door. I went to answer the door. It was our neighbor, Clara. Oh, hi. Are any of your parents here by any chance? Yes, there's my mom, but she's upset. Oh, can I talk to her? You! After all you've done, you still have the nerve to show up on my door? Get off my porch! Get lost! I went back to eating breakfast as thoughts filled my head. Why did Clara knock on our door? Is Dad in danger? Isn't Dad at her house? I eventually finished my food and went back to my room. I played my Atari for a few hours until my mom knocked on my door. Hey, sweetie. I'm sorry for being like that for the past few days. It's just... I couldn't believe your father could do this to me after all those years. It's fine, Mom. I know how you feel. I'm glad you do. Hey, do you want to go to the cinema? Are you kidding? Yes. My friends told me about a film called Star Wars. I really wanted to see it. Come on then, get ready and come out to the car. We went to the cinema, watched a film called Star Wars and went back home. As my mother parked her car and we approached the door, we heard a woman repeatedly screaming, "Help me! Somebody! Please help me!" It sounded like it was coming from inside the house. The nearest police station was 1 hour away. My mom got a revolver she had in the car and kicked in the door to the house. I went in behind her, and what I saw still shocked me to this very day. I saw my father, or what I thought was him, eating a human corpse while repeatedly screaming, "Help!" Without any hesitation, my mother shot him repeatedly, but the gunshots did nothing. Instead of falling dead or at least getting injured, he got up and launched himself at her. I couldn't think properly, so I decided to run to my room and lock myself in. As I ran up the stairs, I heard my mom screaming and crying as the demon ripped her apart. I got into my room and locked the door behind me. I started crying as I realized what had happened. My mother was killed by my father, or whatever demon he had in him. Amidst all the chaos, I remembered I had a telephone in my room. I held back my tears and dialed 911. "911, what is your emergency?" Hello? My dad, he got possessed by a demon and killed my mom. I need you to stay calm, okay? Can you please tell us you're at... Hey, buddy. I froze in terror. The telephone fell out of my hand. Hello? Kid, are you still there? No, you're not my dad. Do you want to go to the park? Come on, buddy. Let's go to the park. Come on, buddy. Let's go to the park. He started to kick the door in while repeating that same sentence over and over again. His voice got louder with each kick. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I had a window in my room, but my room was on the second floor of our house. I had two choices: jump out the window or die. As the demon's voice got louder and his kicks got more powerful, I decided to jump. I opened my window, stood on the sill and closed my eyes. I felt my feet sliding off the windowsill as the door to my bedroom burst open. I felt a great pain as my legs hit the ground. Even with all that pain, I still carried myself up and tried to run as hard as I could. I began to run with a limp as I heard the demon let out an ear-piercing screech. I knew my life was over. I knew that he'd jump out the window and land straight on me. But surprisingly, I heard him running out of my room. So he's afraid of heights then? I said to myself. I still knew that he wanted me dead, and that he'd eventually run out the front door and kill me. I kept on running as I reached the house on the next street. I banged on the door as hard as I possibly could, until an old man answered. "What are you doing at such a late time, boy?" "Move!" "Hey, what's gotten into you, Davy?" "Mr. Matthews, please just close the door. I'll explain." "I'm not doing..." "Close the door!" He eventually complied. "You'll probably think I'm crazy, but my parents were arguing, and my dad..." "I'm gonna call CPS if you don't let my son out of there, you all..." "Mr. Matthews, please don't let..." "What's going on, Abraham?" Oh Lord, I thought he wasn't married. It's gonna be a bloodbath in here. I decided to go back to running. I ran out of the house via the back door as I heard Mr. Matthews let the demon in the house. I felt like a horrible person as I heard Mr. Matthews and his wife get torn to shreds by that devil. As I ran, I felt as if I was a murderer. I technically caused their deaths, after all. Going into their house is an action that still haunts me to this very day. I'm ashamed to say it, but the death of Mr. Matthews bought me some time. As the demon was eating them, I managed to get far away from the house. I eventually found a man and his family driving back home. I stopped the man and explained my situation. He surprisingly believed me. The man went to his house, which luckily was far from where the demon was. He dropped off his family and then drove to the airport where he parked his car and got me on a flight to Kansas. He knew I couldn't survive alone, so he decided to come with me. He got me an apartment and sent a certain amount of money each month to spend on food. He came to visit every once in a while until he and his family eventually moved to Manhattan and adopted me. I finally had people whom I could call parents again. I finally had a family again. My life went on normally. I graduated college, got a job, moved out, and got married. I had children of my own and would occasionally visit my family every now and then. My adoptive father died back in 2012. Then my mother followed in 2014. I still mourn their loss to this day, but I didn't write all of this to keep people up at night. 3 days ago, I got a call from one of my siblings about a man who broke into their home. I asked if I should come over, but he assured me that they'd be fine and that he had already called 911 and the police were on their way. On top of that, he and his son were both armed. His phone was about to die, so I told him to stay safe before hanging up. I was worried sick that night. I barely put myself to sleep. I woke up the next morning to my son calling me. I went to see what he wanted, when much to my dismay, my worst nightmare had come true.
Dad, Uncle Sam is dead. He's dead.
I almost dropped dead on the floor as he said that.
What do you mean he's dead?
I ran over to him. I saw the TV on and the news reporter talking about a deadly burglar that ended the lives of a family of 5. I turned the TV off as I broke down crying. My brother and his entire family were wiped out in the blink of an eye. Not going to his house that night might be the biggest mistake of my life. I eventually stopped crying as my family comforted me. I went on with my day and contacted a funeral service to arrange my brother's funeral. The next morning I went to the morgue to see his body. It was mutilated. His eyes were popped, his hands were cut off, and a massive smile was carved onto his face. I feared that my father, or the demon that possessed him, might still be alive. What if it found me? I was prepared to move out right after the funeral, which was supposed to happen on Saturday the 16th of this month. Worried sick, I was forced to go on with my day. Eventually, night came and I went to bed. I woke up to my daughter's voice this morning.
Dad, someone is at our front porch. He says he wants to see you.
I got out of bed and went to the front door. My fears were confirmed as I looked through our Ring camera. I saw my father. He still looked exactly the same as he did 45 years ago. I told my daughter to barricade the door and hide in the master bedroom. I woke my whole family up and told them to hide. I already called 911 and can hear him breaking down our front door as I'm writing this. The Last Hunt of the Reaper. Written by Redditor Scare in a Box. They walked in without a care in the world. I acted relaxed, hiding my eagerness, forcing my face to appear bored. The bell above the door rang as it closed, and a group of 4 teenagers entered, 3 girls, 1 boy. The group spoke in hushed tones while they walked about my store, studying cryptic items that reeked of the occult. Though people were often attracted to forces they were unable to grasp, those who did go ahead with the ritualistic requirements of my items were few. My store was perfect to attract those few, however. One of the girls approached the desk to talk to me.
Excuse me?
I feigned interest. Yes, young maiden, how may I be of assistance? Do you know anything about Ouija boards? I know all there is to know about them. Youngsters like you tend to poke fun at such objects. The girl's friends accordingly snickered at the back of the store. Yet those who play with it rarely repeat the experience. And there are those, of course, who aren't lucky enough to be able to repeat it. The girl mulled this over. Why do you sell it at your store then? I smiled. If I told her the truth, she would think me a joker and not go through with the ritual. So I lied. These are items that directly connect us to places better left alone. If one were to destroy said items, one would find oneself in the darkest tangles of destiny. By their very nature, these objects must exist to keep the balance of the worlds. Oh, how they ate it up, and with such earnest expressions. The girl who was talking to me was especially entranced. It can be healthy to experiment with items such as Ouija boards. If nothing else, they can humble those who jeer at things much more powerful than they are. I eye the girl's friends. So you're saying you'd rather curse other people than be cursed yourself for the greater good? The girl asked. I nodded. You catch on quick. The girl handed me the Ouija box and I passed it on the scanner. What are you planning to do with this? Contact someone dear? The girl shrugged. A boy from our school was killed in an abandoned warehouse north of the town. We want to see if his spirit still lingers. Spooky stuff. The girl laughed. Very spooky stuff. Hey pal, the boyfriend of hers said in an overly aggressive tone. Yes, pal, I replied. Boys like this were always the first to crumble at the sight of a threat. Their wills were weak, their minds feeble, susceptible to the tiniest divergence from their authority. Most humans were, but some more than others. That board ain't cursed now, is it? I spun the board in my hands. I undid the small strip of tape and opened the box, showing it to them. This, my youngsters, is but cardboard and wood and a little bit of glass. This ain't cursed, but you are doing the cursing. If I had to give you one piece of advice, I'd tell you to leave this board and everything that has something to do with it alone. What now? Are you going to sell us herbs to cast away evils? And the boy laughed. I pointed at patches of herbs on the back of the store. I could. Do you want some? I do advise you to take them. Just buy the Ouija board, Mary, the boy said, half laughing and walking out of the store. I decided then that that one would be the first to go. The girl, Mary, smiled at me politely and said, I'm sorry for them. I'm sorry for them as well. I shrugged it off. Mary paid and I handed her the box, wishing her the rest of a good day. Just as she reached the door, I called back. Miss? Yes? She said. Here, I've got something you might want to take. Oh, I'm all out of money. That's all right. It's a special offer. I like to treat my polite customers well. And I smiled. I've got to be careful with my smiles. I have turned people away through its supposed wrongness. Mary felt none of it, however, and returned to my desk. The girl was so honest, so naive. I had to hold myself from sprawling laughter. I pretended to search the shelves behind me, held out my hand, and materialized the necklace, the amulet, my blessed gift. I showed it to the girl. The amulet was a simple cord with a small metal raven attached to it. It looked Masonic and rural, a perfect concoction. This, I said, is called the Blessed Raven. This is an ancient amulet worn by Celtic priests when they battled evil spirits. The amulet by itself is made of simple materials, and I had a bunch of them blessed in Tibet. They should protect you shall anything bad happen. Anything bad? I shrugged again. Spirits are temperamental. The realm beyond is tricky, so it's good to be prepared. She held out her hand. Do you accept the amulet? Sure. I closed my hand around it. Do you accept it? Yes, Jesus, I accept it. I felt the bond forming, and I smiled again. This time, the girl recoiled, even if unconsciously. "Thank you." She exited the store in a rush. Falling back on my seat, I let out a sigh of relief and chuckled. Once again, they'd fallen for the blessed gift like raindrops in a storm. I've achieved a lot over the years. I was proud of my kills, proud of my hunts. For today, or very near today, I would celebrate with a feast. They'd never see the demon before I was at their throats. Demons do not appear out of nowhere, nor is our existence something lawless that ignores the rules of the natural world. Our existence is very much premeditated, necessary even if we are few and our work is not substantial enough to change the tides of history. Rumors of us keep humanity in line. We do not eat humans, some of us do, but not because we need it for nourishment. We hunt, and it is the killing that sustains us. Our bodies turn the act into energy, sweet, sweet energy and merriment. Our means of hunting and preparing the prey also vary. Each of us has very constricting contracts which won't let us do as we please. For us to be hunters, we need to be strong and fast and above all, intelligent. These are traits not easily given. They must be earned, negotiated. They must be exchanged. I, 2h30min, operate in a very quaint manner. I am bestowed with a capable body, though I cannot hunt my every prey. For each group I go after, one member must survive. Hence the amulet, the blessed gift, a gift for the human who survives, and a cursed nuisance for me. I must offer the amulet to a human, and the human must accept it and wear it. This chosen one will be completely and utterly physically immune to me from the moment he puts on the amulet to the moment death comes knocking. This may cause hiccups during a hunt. If I hunt in a populated area, the amulet human might escape and get help, and I will be powerless to stop them. Imprisoning them is considered an attack, and as such I cannot stop them from leaving. For my own survival, my hunts must take place where no help can be reached. Most importantly, the amulet human is to be my weakness. A single touch from them would burn my skin. A punch would break my bones. A single wound could become fatal. I am a monster to humanity, but these few humans are monsters to me. Nonetheless, they pose me no danger. I am careful in selecting them. They must be the weak links of the group, the naive souls, those who will either be too afraid to face me or those too sick to get me. I felt them, felt the blessed gift getting away. I could sense its direction, its speed, the heartbeat of the girl who wore it. I know when she took the amulet off to inspect it, then put it back on. I know what she thought as she thought it. And I know she felt uncomfortable all the time, as if something was watching her. It was. I was. Even after this hunt was over, even after she threw the amulet off, there would be a burn mark shaped like a raven on her chest. I would never be able to touch her or hurt her. And I wouldn't need to. I would disappear, only returning when it was time to plan my next hunt, years hence. I wish I could still feel those who were saved by the blessed gift. Did they hate me? Fear me? Somehow, had they ended up revering me as a force of nature? There was one I'd like to meet again. I'll never forget those eyes. She'd been a little girl, and if still alive, she'd be but a withered crone now. Her health had been lamentable then, so I doubted she'd lived this long. So I sat, and while waiting for Mary and her friends to take the Ouija board to the abandoned warehouse, I thought back to my glorious hunts and to my disgraceful hunts, to that horrible, wretched hunt. That day my body had been masked as a friendly bohemian of a lean but frail build. I decided that campers on the remotest sides of the mountain would be more willing to pick a hitchhiker up if he looked as non-threatening as possible. Thus I made my body into a thin bohemian. I could always bulk it up later. The first travellers that picked me up were a pleasant couple with a child. As a rule, I never went after couples. First, because hunting a single person was unsatisfactory, and second, because the amulet member of the couple would be greatly inclined to hunt me down in vengeance. Though that wasn't a worry I normally had. With so many campers going around, I was sure to find another group. I caught 2 more rides until I found the perfect people. I ended up coming across a batch of young adults and teenagers having a picnic below a viewpoint, and 2 of the youngest were in wheelchairs. The girl on the wheelchair had a visible handicap on her left leg, while the boy was pale and sickly. It looked like their older brothers had brought them along with their friends, though they hadn't done so out of obligation. They all looked happy and cordial, but there was a hint of discord in the undertones of some strings of conversation. I smiled oh so delightfully. "I am sorry to disturb you, my guys, but do any of you have any water?" I could see that the older ones eyed me warily. Was I a vagrant? Was I dangerous? I held up an empty bottle. I ran out a couple of miles ago, and the last time I drank from a river, I ended up having the shits for a week. This got a laugh from them all, and the older ones eased up a little. "I have a bottle here," the girl in the wheelchair said, grabbing one from her backpack and handing it to me. "Thank you so very much, miss. What's your name, darling?" "Marilyn," she said, and just like that, I was in for the hunt. Through comical small talk, I was able to make the group accept me for the night. I had canned food in my backpack, which I shared. I had cannabis and rolling paper, which made everyone's eyes light up. Hadn't I been who I was, these youngsters would have remembered this night for the rest of their lives. Only Marilyn and the boy in the wheelchair eyed me wearily. "You okay?" I asked. She looked away. I had to earn her good graces. She was weak, and her health seemed frail. She'd be a good fit to wear the blessed gift. "You don't seem okay." "My lungs," she said. "They're not great. Asthma." I nodded as if I perfectly understood the ailment, as if it had brought me to a dear one's suffering as well. "You know, when I was—" "Hey, Marilyn," one teenager said. He was tall and buff and looked much like Marilyn. "Leave the man alone." Marilyn's eyes turned back to her feet. "That's all right, man," I said. "She's cool." The boy looked at me as if I was some alien who had no conception of human culture. "Cool, you say?" He wore a jeering grin. "Sure thing." After engaging in an uninteresting conversation with Marilyn, who appeared to be greatly immersed in what she was saying, I got up to go to the bathroom because the time seemed appropriate, sociologically speaking. I don't use the bathroom. I used the opportunity to spy on the group from afar, to observe their interactions. As soon as I was out of earshot, of human earshot, that is, the group turned on Marilyn and the sickly boy. "God, Marilyn, you're so lame. You never speak with us and you're speaking with that bum," the oldest boy said. "You never let me speak," she protested. The girl next to the boy, who looked like his girlfriend, slapped his arm and said, "Don't be nasty to your sister. She's the antisocial freak, not me," he replied. Tears stung Marilyn's eyes. "Screw you, John." The scene went on for a while longer, a time I used to plan the next part of the hunt. I returned and sat near Marilyn again. She was still sensitive from before, though I managed to bring her out of her shell by asking her about her friends, what she usually did in her spare time, her favorite books, and so on. She liked classics with monsters, say Shelley's Frankenstein or Stoker's Dracula. I was alive when those novels were published, so in a way, they were very dear to me as well. I occasionally had to switch the conversation to the other kids in the group, but I tried to talk with Marilyn as much as I could. And an interesting thing began to happen, something that had never hitherto come to take place. I kept the conversation going out of pure interest. I was sick, most probably. Demons can have illnesses of the mind. so I've been told. Yet the effect was clear. I was enjoying the conversation, and as such, I kept it going. I could have introduced the amulet a long time ago, hours ago in fact. The sun, meanwhile, set, and the group decided to hop back on their truck and ride to a camping site 20 minutes away. They were kind enough to let me ride with them. I do sense something strange today, I eventually said. Me and Marilyn were in the back of the truck together with the sickly boy, who was quiet and refusing any attempts at communication whatsoever. Something strange? How so? Do you know why I wander around so much? I hate cities. The reason is simple, if you can believe it. I can feel bad things. I can feel bad feelings. In a city there is stress, anxiety, sadness, there is violence, frustration, pollution. Out here, there's nature, there's peace, there's an order, an ancient order, harmonious in so many aspects. Here I feel safe. Marilyn nodded towards the front of the truck. You're probably feeling my brother then. I felt him a long time ago. I'm feeling something different now. I reached over to my backpack and I froze. Should I? The moment the amulet was around her neck, it'd be too late to halt the hunt. These thoughts of mine befuddled me. They weren't supposed to happen. Why me? Why now? You okay? She asked. I nodded. The sullen boy glanced up at me quizzically. Yeah, sorry. As I was saying, I feel something different now. Something I've felt before along this mountain range. I think something evil lurks in these woods. This could help. I bit my lip as the amulet formed in my hand. I clutched it in my fist. Marilyn lit up. Oh, what is it? Is it some kind of artifact? Some witchcraft thingy? I smiled, and it wasn't a grotesque smile. It was painful. Yeah, you may call it that. This is an amulet, the Blessed Raven. It's a gift. Oh, thank you so much. For me, right? Of course. Do you accept it? It's pretty. Damn right I accept it. I nodded, hesitated, then handed it to her. Something in my chest area weighed down as she put the amulet on, and I gained insight into her very mind, into her very heart. She was happy, content, even that somebody was talking to her, making an effort to get along with her. Does it look good on me? She asked. Suits you just fine. It was strange how I knew that even if I had to, I wouldn't be able to kill her. Nevertheless, the hunt was on now, and it was too late to turn back. The kids set up camp. I also helped Marilyn down the truck. Slowly, my thoughts turning to mush midway as I thought them. The sickly boy kept studying me as if he had already guessed what I was. Even if he cried wolf, what good would it do? Destiny was already set in stone. You keep spacing out, Marilyn told me. I'm tired, and the woods are really beautiful around here. Marilyn nodded, but also dark. A little too dark, if you ask me. Marilyn's brother lit up a fire. I had to surround it with stones as embers kept threatening to light the grass on fire. This forest would have no option but to witness evil today. Let it at least not see fire. The group naturally came to rest around the fireplace, stabbing marshmallows and crackers with a stick and holding them up to the fire. It was a chilly but pleasant night. Have you ever heard of the midsummer ghost? A boy said. And so it started. I glanced at Marilyn. She'd be safe. She'd at least be safe. The midsummer ghost always hides like a man in need. You never see him for who he is, for he only lets you know what he is the moment he's got you in his claws. This was too fitting. God was playing tricks on me. Legends say he was a little boy who was abandoned in the woods by parents who hated him, all because he was deformed and broken. It is said the boy never died, that he was taken in by the woods and became a part of them. He asks for help, as help was never given to him in life. If it is denied ever again, The midsummer ghost will slice and pull your entrails and dress himself in them. The kids were silent. I began to let go of this human form. What was I doing? Why wasn't there a way to stop this? But there was, and it would cost me my life. The sullen boy in the wheelchair moaned, grabbed and shook the wheels, then raised a finger at me. One by one, everyone at the fire looked at his hand, then turned their heads at where he was pointing, turned to face me. I was smiling. I was no longer myself. Marilyn was the last to look at me. Her eyes watered as my skin came apart to reveal my hard and thick fur, swaying as if I were underwater. Her brother screamed. The others all followed. All except Marilyn. Above fear and horror, above disgust, Marilyn felt disappointment. I wanted to end the hunt there and then, but I couldn't. If I stopped now, it'd be my life on the line.
Why?
Marilyn croaked. I lunged. I attacked her brother first, went for his throat, saw his blood, made dark by the light of the fire, seeping into the leaves and grass. My body finally finished cracking out of its fake human cocoon, and I was free. There were few sensations as pleasant as the soft earthly wind caressing the claws at the ends of my tentacles, caressing the thousands of small tendrils emerging out of my mouth. My true form felt the freest, and yet I wanted nothing more than to return to my human shape. Marilyn was white as snow. The expression on her face, that of a ghost who'd long left its host body. She was seeing a monster, a gigantic shrimp of black fur and eldritch biology, a sight reserved for books and nightmares. Marilyn turned her wheelchair and sped down into the darkness of the trees. The entire group scattered, in fact, yelling for help, leaving me alone by the fire. I looked at it, empty, aghast at what I'd always been. I stomped the fire until there was nothing left but glowing coal. I ran after the two girls who were always next to Marilyn's brother, though their bodies were pumping with adrenaline, running faster than what would otherwise be considered normal. I caught up to them while barely wasting a breath. Thus worked the wonders of my body. I crumpled the head of one against the trunk of a tree, then robbed the heart out of the other. With each death my body became lighter, healthier. The hunt was feeding me, making me whole again. And I was emptier than ever. One by one the group was lost to me. One by one they crumpled to my claws. I tried to kill them before they got a chance to fully look at me. I didn't want me to be the last thing they saw in this wretched existence. Lastly, I came before the sullen boy. He moaned and was afraid. He'd sensed me from the start, and still he was doomed. Those closest to death often have that skill, though it is a skill that rarely saves them. "I'm sorry," I said. "Stop!" a trembling voice said from behind me. "Marilyn." I glanced back and saw a petrified girl clutching a kitchen knife. She hadn't run away. She had gone to the truck to find a weapon. "Foolish girl." "I cannot," I said. "I am sorry, Marilyn, but I do what I must do. I am bound by rules as ancient as the dawn. You showed me things. I thank you for that. But I will not stop. I cannot stop." I raised one of my claws. "Please, stop!" She sobbed and pushed the wheels of her chair with all her might. I brought my claws clean through the boy's skull. His soul vanished instantly. I felt crippling despair emanating from Marilyn. A pain so hellacious my lungs failed to pull in air. I couldn't move, not while she wore the blessed gift, and her mind streamed all its intensity into mine. The knife in her hands plunged into my back. Pain. An entire universe threatened to pour out of me. The agony of the countless people I'd thrown to death's precipice threatened to overwhelm my existence. Above my physical ailment was only Marilyn's pain. It took centuries worth of stored energy just to keep myself from passing out. She removed the knife. It clattered to the ground. Remorse. All her anger and fear turned into simple, mundane remorse. "I am sorry, little one," I whispered. Marilyn, sobbing, yanked the amulet off her neck and threw it over to where the knife had fallen. Where the amulet had been, her skin smoked and the shape of a raven formed. She'd always be safe from me. That was my only comfort. I was curled up, trying not to move. Each breath of mine was raking pain. I was told even a punch from one who wore the amulet could prove fatal, and here I was, stabbed, black, slick blood like oil gushing out. "Won't you finish this?" I croaked. "I will find you," she managed to say through shaky breaths. I heard her wheels turn, cracking dry leaves as she escaped. The only human to ever touch me disappeared into the moonless night, into the embrace of the forest. My head was filled with visions of Marilyn as I walked to the warehouse. There was something odd happening with Mary, the girl who'd bought the Ouija board. I felt the usual fear and anxiety, yet there was something strange in her emotions, as if they were thin, as if they were veiled. I scouted the perimeter around the warehouse, spied through the windows. I saw the 4 teenagers moving their eyepiece over the letters on the board, laughing with their nerves on edge. The little fools. I smiled. I went to the front door, let go of my human skin, and waited until my true body came to light. The sun was nearly set, the sky bathed in those purple tones of dusk. It was the perfect hour for my hunt. I opened the doors, entered, and closed them hard enough to make sure my prey would hear their way out closing. I set a chain around the door handles, and I froze. The girl sporting my blessed gift ceased being scared at once. Instead, triumph of all things filled her heart. Oh no, I had walked into a trap. "So you've come, Grobler," a familiar voice said to me. I was still and aghast. I wanted to be content to hear Marilyn again after all these years. I wanted to go and hug her and ask her how she's been. But that wasn't how our relationship would go tonight, was it? She was old now, old and worn and tired. "You've learned my name," I said. I hadn't heard it spoken out loud in a long time. "Everyone I spoke to judged you a legend, but I knew you were a legend that bled. Bleeding legends can be killed." "I spared you," I told her. "Out of necessity. I should have killed you when I had the chance. I was afraid, but I know better now. I spent my life trying to correct that one mistake." She smiled, gestured at me, "and my chance to do just that has arrived." She walked into the few remaining shreds of light coming from the holes in the roof. Marilyn was old and withered, though she wasn't in a wheelchair anymore. She walked with the help of crutches, but she walked. She had a weapon held toward me. It was a kitchen knife. "Everyone," she said, "you can come out." Mary walked over to Marilyn. Other people sauntered in from the shadows, all holding weapons, blades, knives, bats, axes, everything. All showed the burned raven mark below their necks. I recognized each and every single one of them. They were people I had permitted to live while forcing them to be aware of their loved ones' deaths. I smiled, finding glee I hadn't known I had. At last, I was the one being hunted. "The girl who bought the board was a good actress," I said. "My grandkid," Marilyn explained. "I trained Mary well. You were hard to find, and I was sure you'd be harder to catch, hopping from town to town, always changing appearance. You were a ghost." "A rather interesting ghost," an old man said from my side. I remembered him. He was a historian whose colleagues I had hunted during an expedition. "I found you in documents centuries old. You once struck up a friendship with a monk who studied you." I nodded. I had. That man had been a lot like Marilyn. "He gave you a name after your physiology, Grobler. How many innocents have you killed since then? Hundreds? Thousands?" "Too many," was my answer. "Do what you must. I did what I had to do, so I won't apologize. You know I cannot attack you, but that doesn't mean I can't weigh you down or run." I turned to rush to the door, but there was a young woman there with a raven mark below her neck. She held a pitchfork. It's no use, Marilyn said. We each had our weapons blessed. I spent decades studying you. You might be fast, you might be strong, but against us, you're powerless. I won't sit idle as you hunt me. And Marilyn smiled, so very much like me. The sweet girl I'd known was nowhere to be seen. I had transformed her into a monster she had never wanted to become. Blessed weapons couldn't save them. I could dodge bullets, so evading their attacks would be a piece of cake. I would walk out of here victorious to live another day. Marilyn seemed to guess what I was thinking. She fished something out of her purse and handed it to her granddaughter. I squinted and froze. It was one of my hairs, a short knife, and a vial of thick black oil. My blood. Don't look so scared now, Agamemnon. You must know what this is. Surely you know what will happen if you try to hurt a wearer of the blessed raven. I sprinted, jumped on a wall and tried to climb out of a window. Bullets flew and ricocheted all around me. I was forced to retreat back down. God damn it. Marilyn put the hair on the knife and emptied the vial of blood over it. She handed it to Mary, who got on her knees, put her hand on the ground, and raised her knife above it. Triumph! Such strong triumph emanating from that girl. You killed so many, I know this was your nature, but it was a corrupted nature, Marilyn said. If I'd been anyone else, I wouldn't have cared, but this was Marilyn. I was unable to doubt the rightness of those words. There are others like me. There are others more dangerous, I said. You should have lived your life, been happy, counted that as a blessing. You should have counted that as a gift. You threw your life away. She shook her head. I will hunt others after you. Those who will come after me will, at least. I'm old. I need to rest. Marilyn held her hand out, telling her granddaughter to wait. When you hunted me, something happened to you, as if you didn't want to be doing what you did. It took me years to accept that, but I did. You were paralyzed by me, and as such, you let me strike you, and you bled. I tried to run again, and again bullets came, this time from the outside. Marilyn truly had found all my victims. I was starting to panic, my fur swaying furiously. I was outmatched. I was told humans would become too fragile after a hunt to come after me. Demons could be so blind. All you stand for ends here, Agamemnon. Thank you for saving us, yet that will never account for your sins. No, wait! Marilyn nodded and her granddaughter stabbed her own hand with a knife dressed in my fur and blood, a knife with me in it, and pain washed through me all at once. This was a direct breach of my contract. A part of me was hurting a wearer of the amulet, and as such, I paid the price. I screamed, fell, convulsed. I saw colors bursting as pain threatened to subdue me. Then I felt a kick, a punch, a hit after another, all from the branded ones I had saved. The dark unconscious I'd brought on so many finally caught up to me. I smiled as my prey became the hunter, and life elided my body, becoming but a husk of ancient oaths. Keegans Gulch, written by Redditor, Guilty Chemistry 9337. They always told us never to take Keegans Gulch. For the life of me, I can't remember anybody explaining why we shouldn't have taken Keegans Gulch. They were always very blunt with their demands. Never take Keegans Gulch. It was one of those things where it felt like if you simply asked why not, you'd be accused of talking back, and you'd still not get an answer. In lieu of an explanation, the townsfolk just sort of made up their own. And for those who grew up in that town, the explanations generally correlated with age. When we were in grade school, we had no doubt that the gulch must have been haunted in some way. There was an old pioneer cemetery dug into the steep banks of the gulch's sides. No, older than a pioneer cemetery, a European cemetery with English on the tombstones. but it had been there impossibly long, predating the first white trappers exploring the area. "No, that's dumb," other grade school students would counter. "It was probably just a monster, like a wolfman." When we were in middle school, the threat had morphed into creepy perverts, nudists, and the like. Maybe that had more to do with our juvenile senses of humor and the mocking of unexplained grown-up rules. In high school, that threat evolved into cultists, Satan worshippers, and malicious drug-fueled hillbillies. Perhaps that was a bit more of an existential threat and less likely to attract curious would-be adventurers. By the time we were all adults, we just stopped asking the question, just like the adults who'd always told us to never go there. Then the question changed from why not to just why. Why would you want to take Keegans Gulch in the first place? By then most of us had cars or access to cars. If you wanted to go from town down to the lake shore, just drive. Or if you must hike or ride your bike, take the trail down Mary's Canyon. It's a much more pleasant trip, surely. The trailhead is closer to town. The 2 Marys River that follows its course is beautiful, babbling, and well controlled. There are many wide footbridges, and in the summer it offers excellent fishing, wading, and a few choice swimming holes. In the spring the hiker can pick delicious blackberries, huckleberries, and salmon berries. In the autumn the leaves of the vine maples and the big leaf maples turn the most extraordinary colors and fall as thick as snowflakes. Even in the winter the trip is pleasant, with the canyon walls keeping the chill winds at bay. The little creek becomes a noisy white-water torrent, but because the channel has been so well maintained, it never floods its bank. Best of all, hiking drops you off at the best, sandiest beach on the lake, not far from the parking lot if you've driven. Keegans Gulch offered none of that. The trail heads further out of town, way up Keegan Lane. The drainage rivulet that flows down the ravine can't even be called a proper creek. The water that feeds it doesn't even come from a proper spring, it's just groundwater perpetually squeezed out of the mud like a wet sponge. It doesn't flow in a proper course, but just sort of trickles down the gulch's floor, meaning you have to trample through mud and gunk in all but the driest of summer months. And by then the stagnant pools are breeding grounds for mosquitoes. None of the delicious berries are present, except perhaps for the unproductive and thorn-riddled blackberry vines which proliferate almost as thoroughly as the poisoned oak. There's no proper trail per se, and if there were it'd be crisscrossed by downed trees that have never been cleared. That's despite the land being private property owned by various timber interests who don't take kindly to trespassers. And the reason they've never cleared it out is because the gulch is too steep and muddy and worthless to bother. If you were to somehow hypothetically make your way through it to the lake, you'd find a short that was nothing but a 4-foot root-snarled bank, and you'd be better off just swimming across to the good beach than bothering to go back the god-forsaken way you had come. That was obviously the reason you never took Keegans Gulch. This was obvious to every rational thinking adult. Strangely, it never occurred to me how we all knew this until after I moved out of town, when none of us had ever gone there in the first place. Maybe it was moving away that did it, broke the spell, so to speak. I never really had an interest in Keegans Gulch. I'll admit though, I did grow a little homesick for the town I grew up in. I would occasionally read the monthly paper, read the reviews for the old diner under new management, follow the little small town scandals and gripes concerning the local government. I think what really did it was checking in on my old town haunts on Google Earth. Things looked different from a satellite's perspective, though oddly familiar in a way only a map can provide. Then I'd check the street view, and things were largely the same as I'd remembered them, save for a few trivial things. Dirt roads would get paved, the trees were a little bigger, the old church had installed a reader board alongside the road. I saw a major new wing built onto my old high school. There was an empty lot where an abandoned haunted house had once stood, explored by my buddies and me, and no doubt countless other teenage troublemakers. There was the farmhouse where I'd enjoyed my first alcohol-fueled party. There were the dangerous S-curves where my best bud had rolled his cutlass. Fortunately, he'd been unhurt, unlike his ego. There was the lake beach where I'd enjoyed the water many times over the hottest of summer days. There was Mary's Canyon, the pleasant nature trail, with that clear babbling brook that led back to and from town. And there, above it, like a black hairy spider on a Thanksgiving dining table, was an aerial view of Keegans Gulch. Seeing it like that, being surprised by it like that, I guess that's what spiked my curiosity. I hadn't thought about the place, nor all the warnings about it in many, many years. I suppose that let me see it from a new perspective, perhaps with a bit less bias. The trailhead didn't seem that much further than Mary's Canyon trailhead. The route didn't look that crooked. Sure, the leaves of the trees seemed darker and thicker than the conventional route, but surely it wouldn't be impossible. Certainly not during the summer months when the creek was likely to run dry. And why not just call it a creek? Obviously the flowing water had carved out the gulch. What else could have? Geologically it was a little different than the Mary's Canyon. The place was like the black sheep of my hometown's named location. The only thing that set it apart on my monitor from Mary's Canyon were the digital markers on Google Earth's overlay. There was the green border that showed it was technically a county park, the little squiggly line indicating the trail itself, invisible in this view due to all the foliage, various photo icons that people have uploaded. Just a few 100 yards north, as the crow flies, was unmarked and unloved wilderness, virgin territory ripe for attention. So I resolved that the next time I was home to visit family, I'd defy all those warnings and go ahead and take the gulch. A couple of young parents with their little kids covered in sunscreen shot me odd looks as I walked past the Mary's Canyon trailhead up to Keegan's Road. There were a lot of destinations out in the countryside that aren't well marked, but you could usually tell that you were there by the number of cars parked up against the shoulder of the road. Mary's Canyon had a whole dirt parking lot. This one didn't even have a turnout. Neither did it have a sign, neither welcoming nor warning. Still, I knew where I was when I got there. The trees had grown thick along the road to my left, dim in the shade under all those maple leaves. Yet when I got where I needed to go, two of the massive trunks were split by a wide gap that clearly extended a long way and led downward out of view because, despite the bright sun, it was nearly pitch black. It looked a bit like a great doorway, at least until you entered and your eyes adjusted. Immediately in there was a set of natural sort of stairs worn into the canyon's side. People had been through here, surely. It just wasn't the heavy-duty aluminium staircase that the parks department had installed on the canyon to the south. It was just uneven layers of dirt compacted by human feet and held up a bit by the thick roots of trees. I enjoyed myself at first. It was a pleasant discovery. I wish it hadn't taken me so long, being so close to my home. Sure, it wasn't the manicured official park alternative, but the foliage was pretty enough. There was a large circular clearing at the base of the bank, surrounded by firs, and the direction of the trail was clear enough. With the stairs soon behind me, the scenery was perfectly fine. The little stream of water had not completely dried, but was running clear along the gulch bed. Being undisturbed by regular foot traffic, it had carved a small meandering trail into the forest soil, a whole river system in miniature. It was small enough that it neither left much mud nor served as an impediment to a hiker. It was easy enough to simply step widely over it to the next solid gravel bar, or leap if the mood suited you. I developed a sort of bouncing rhythm to my hike and felt a bit childish in a good way. It brought back memories of little games I'd play, like avoiding sidewalk cracks or patches of imaginary lava. To either side of me the ground rose at sharp angles, the tops blocked by the foliage. Not that I minded, it seemed quite picturesque. With the angle of the sun, the thick old trunks of the firs seemed black, all backlit by a profuse green glow of sunlight shining through the leaves of the low-covering vine maple. Here the trail grew quite straight, and if anything the banks grew taller and steeper. I was reminded of some fantasy film. It would be easy to imagine an ambush of ravenous orcs careening down the banks to waylay a party of adventurers. In fact, it was easy to see that the spot, the whole trail even, might be a perfect spot for live-action role-playing for anybody who was into that sort of hobby. The trail grew a bit darker and the plants grew a bit thicker. The concept of a malevolent force descending the gulch just sort of lingered in my head as I walked, and to be honest, sort of festered there. The trip was quite beautiful, and I had no reason for anxiety. All the old warnings was still a psychological cloud hovering over me, and I could hardly fault the gulch for it. The gulch bed remained mostly gravel, with occasional bars of mud or sand at certain meanders. Yet I noticed out in the woods bigger stones that, for some reason, had never washed down the gulch's bed. I knew from my past education in the area that geologically this place had all been carved out by glaciers in the last ice age, so large stones where you wouldn't expect them were hardly unusual, though the number of stones I was seeing was odd, as was their regularity. That seemed more like a thing you'd see back east. None of them were particularly big, none more than 3 feet tall and generally cylindrical. Then it occurred to me, that old story about a mysterious, inexplicable graveyard. If you squinted and used a bit of childish imagination, it wouldn't be hard to see the natural stones as headstones. Perhaps that was a natural explanation for the stories we told as kids, believing that it certainly added to the queer, anxious feeling the sloping gulch walls gave you. I hardly noticed, but my shoes squelched in the mud, then pulled a bit at my sole from suction on the next step. The trail was becoming narrow, and the distinction between the rivulet and the bank became less distinct. Leaping over the rivulet's bed lost any sense, as there was either water or mud regardless of where you stepped. This was about the time I noticed the carvings on the rocks. This took me very much by surprise. Here, again, was the reason a person might be reminded of tombstones. The carvings were infrequent and heavily eroded, at least the first scores of yards. Clearly it wasn't writing or funerary decorations. These weren't gravestones, no, they only suggested such. I puzzled for a while on what it could mean. I thought about ancient petroglyphs, but those were mostly Payan, as far as I could recall, not carvings, and the closest examples of such were hundreds of miles away. No, these carvings couldn't have been some Native American relics. They'd be famous, not shunned. Then it occurred to me that this might be what some people called outsider art. The strange carvings could have been the work of some eccentric recluse. Such people would spend years, decades obsessively crafting various unique artworks in accordance with their creativity or mania. Presumably, these stones had been carved and set here by some inspired if outlandish property owners. It was certainly more imposing than any no trespassing sign. I felt a strong sense that I didn't belong here. I didn't doubt that these were the very source of the folk stories. Both those stories were old when I was very young. More than likely whatever oddball had carved these things was long dead. I continued. Besides, I was no doubt closer to the lake now than the trailhead. I had just about concluded those thoughts when I noticed that the carvings further down the trail had grown distinct enough to interpret their intent. They weren't just decorative. Things were all little fat statues of humans, or close enough to hope that's what they were supposed to depict. Maybe they could have been representing some sort of fantastical goblin or boogan, the orcs I'd been imagining about earlier. It varied from idol to idol, but some had eyes that were too big, or fingers, maybe claws that were too big, and it made it harder to see them as human. Some had horizontal sloths across their big round eyes. It made me think of the ivory goggles that the Inuit peoples used to wear, or the alien-like slit-eyed dogu dug up from ancient Japan. The outsider artist had gone to great lengths to place the statues effectively too. They were placed in the center of split, multi-trunked copses of trees. They leered from massive clumps of roots, as if they were hiding or stalking. How odd it was, I thought, that a long-dead artist could predict how the forest would look today. The ornamentations on the statues evolved. Some had erect phalluses or gaping pudenda. They weren't at all erotic to my eye, but seemed to symbolize some sort of fertility message, like Neolithic cave art. Here were the creepy sex weirdos that the adolescent rumors had warned of. If the sequence of the art was similar to the sequence of the stories, then that would mean, sure enough, the figures grew into gruesome grotesques. They'd lost most of their human aspects, but were very devilish and monstrous. Some bore twisting, lurid tongues, or broken, curved teeth and tusks. Some seemed to be smaller versions of themselves, bas-relief lozenges carved into the bas-relief. The nature of some of these scenes ought to have been droll or dramatic, but these were only horrible. This was when the mud pulled the right shoe clear off my foot. The statuary had been almost hypnotic. I'd lost focus on where I was walking. The trail was almost gone. What was left of it was thick mud. The vine maples had grown close around me, and there were thick bushes of Himalayan blackberry vines growing underneath. I soon gave up any effort of trying to retrieve my shoe while standing on one foot. I conceded to getting my sock, then my pant legs covered in mud. At best, I'd have to walk all the way back with wet socks. I was defeated, and I felt the little excursion had been a big mistake. I suppose that thought was tempting fate. It was only after that I realized how much of a mistake I'd made. I heard a squelch. It sounded like a foot trotting through mud, still distant, out of view and up the trail. Then I heard a second, and a third. Another hiker, the coping part of my brain suggested, just coming in the same direction. The rational part of my brain panicked. Nobody came down this trail. Everybody was warned not to. I consigned my shoe to the mud, turned and ran. I wonder what would have happened if I turned the way I'd come, towards the noise. Maybe that was my last opportunity to make the right choice. Maybe I'd been done for the moment I entered the trailhead. The other shoe was lost after another dozen or so steps. The blackberry thorns tore at my bare arms. I looked down and judged it as not too bad. Faint pink scratches. The squelching behind me was getting closer. What was left from that last bit of childish folk rumor? The wolf man? Whatever it was, the mud wasn't even slowing it down. The sound was getting louder, not just because it was getting closer. It sounded like the thing was getting heavier and bigger. The squelching had turned into wet thuds. I looked at my arms again and realized I'd misjudged. Blood was pouring down my arms. The thorns had been so thin, so sharp, that they'd sliced my flesh deeply, and only exerting was revealing how deep they'd cut. More thorns attacked me. I hit a patch of mud and fell forward, pitching face first into a thick puddle. I didn't hesitate to get back up, though the thickness of the mud slowed me. The thing behind me was almost on top of me. I got up to run again. Trees grew right in the middle of what should have been the trail. The water or mud just flowed around it, and I tried to dodge them too. I think I caught a root. A sharp pain reached my brain as I saw the mud racing up to meet me again, as if in slow motion. A broken ankle, I thought as I got up again. I was sure of it. One step, the attempt at a second, and I fell a third time as I put weight on that broken ankle. Fear had made me as thoughtless as I was desperate. I tried hopping as the thing was almost at my ear. On the fifth or sixth hop, I looked down the trail. It seemed a little brighter up ahead, as if the gulch's walls were receding. There was a big patch of blue. It might have been the sky, it might have been the surface of a cool, clear lake. Thick mud offers poor purchase. I fell for the last time and tried to crawl. The thorny vines wrapped around me, either from my own clumsiness or had become animated by some supernatural agency. My racing mind couldn't tell the difference. Either way, they fixed me in place, as sure as a bale of barbed wire. I turned my doomed head to the side, and there was another one of those statues. Its toothy mouth was agape. I couldn't read its expression. Perhaps glee, perhaps spite, perhaps it was screaming, or perhaps it was rigor mortis. Then the thing behind me on the trail was here. It would have to dig me out of the mud, because it had all become quicksand, and I was sinking deep, deep into the earth. The vines tightened as I fell. In my last thoughts, I wondered what would become of my body. I wondered what had become of all the others who'd made this same misadventure. Then I realized they'd been all around me this whole time. Don't go down Keegans Gulch. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, let me know and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and ring my bell so that you don't miss out on future videos and awesome spine-tingling, goosebump-giving stories. If you don't do these things, the like button will haunt your dreams and stalk your days forever.